This is the Best of the Bravest Nationwide Edition. Not since last year when I had Chief Dan Jones on from North Carolina, who was very brilliant mind in his own right, have I done an installation of this miniseries. And it's a miniseries I plan to really dive back into a little bit more in the coming months. As I was telling tonight's guest, who I'll introduce momentarily off the air, again, we've told so many great stories of New York City, and we will certainly continue to, because there's a lot of great stories to be told from working as a New York City police officer, from working as a New York City firefighter. But besides New York City, there's plenty of other busy places in this country that deserve to be spotlighted in their own right, whether you're walking a beat or working a patrol car, or rather you're working a busy engine company or a busy truck company. And certainly for tonight's guest, he can attest to that on the fire side of things, given the city that he's worked in now for 20 years, which we'll talk about momentarily when I introduce him. Hello, everyone, on this Friday evening edition of the Mike the New Haven podcast, winding down summer. I'm not ready to say goodbye to it, but nevertheless, the weather's still nice. And it's good to see all of you. I see Billy Ryan there, as he always is. Joe Maliga, Brian Keller, retired recently out of the Bridgeport Fire Department. Good to see you, my friend. And, of course, Mr. John Costello, a retired Pennsylvania police sergeant. Always good to see all of you and anybody else who may be tuning in this evening. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was the milestone volume 20 of the Beat Profiles of Police Nationwide. Kim Woodward, who was a CIA intelligence operations officer from 1991 until 2001. A lot of intelligence operations, particularly in the war on drugs in the 90s abroad in Latin America, which he talked about. Very interesting episode in its own right, as I'm sure tonight's will be as well. And just a brief note before I, of course, play Billy Ryan's ad and introduce my next guest. Thank you to everybody who I was able to cross paths with yesterday in New York City. Of course, the somber 24th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And it was good to be with my friends from FDNY Squad 288 over in Maspeth, Queens. 288 Hazmat 1, which lost tragically 19 members that day. And then venturing on down to ESU Truck 3 in the Bronx, which is located in the confines of the 43rd Precinct. They lost 3 members that day, and just very good to see all of you. So for those of you that may watch this, whether you're on the PD side or FD side, I'm glad our paths crossed again yesterday. I know the event is somber. It's always good to see your faces. So with that being said, let's play Billy Ryan's ad, and I don't want to keep my guest waiting too long. I'll introduce him right after this. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Proud supporter indeed. Again, Billy is the best. All right, my next guest is a veteran fire officer whose career in the Philadelphia Fire Department has been defined by a lot of things, including hustle, street smart leadership, and a clear devotion to his craft. From growing up in the shadow of his neighborhood firehouse to leading some of Philly's busiest companies, he has risen steadily through the ranks, never losing sight of what it means to serve. And whether it's responding to fires in the West End of Philadelphia, implementing training reforms, or helping push the science of fire dynamics alongside national experts, his fingerprints are all over a department, I should say, he's proudly called home for 20 years now. And now serving in the citywide Incident Safety Office, he brings in wealth of knowledge, tactical know-how, and a genuine passion for firefighter development and safety. And that for this Volume 6 of the Best of the Bravest Nationwide Edition from the Philadelphia Fire Department, Deputy Chief Tony Bompadre. Chief, welcome. How are you? A pleasure to connect with you.
Hey, Mike. It's good to see you. It's great to connect again. I can't thank you enough for having me on. It's a humbling experience. You know, you've had a lot of heavy hitters on here. I've been a fan for a while, so to be sitting here with you tonight, it's an honor. I really do appreciate it. You know, it's funny, small world, the way we got connected. You know, through your cousin.
Yeah,
a friend of mine, Jose Perez, chief in the city with me. You know, we were just talking one day in the office at Change of Shift, and he asked if I knew about the podcast, and I said, of course, yeah, I've heard of Mike the New Haven, absolutely, and I have his book. And he goes, well, you know, it's my cousin. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You know, it's such a small world, and the fire service, emergency services in general, everybody seems to know somebody somewhere. It's pretty cool, pretty special.
It is. And when he asked me, would you want to have this guy on, referring to you, I'm like, yeah, of course. Like I told you off the air, I don't discriminate. Like I just said on the air, plenty of great stories from New York City, but plenty of great stories from around the country as well. So anybody that's got a story, rather you're on the police side or fire department side, come on down. I don't discriminate. I want to hear it. And we're going to dive into it tonight. But kind of like I alluded to in the introduction, you grew up in the shadow of the Philadelphia Fire Department in more ways than one. So it was something that kind of spoke to you from an early age. Just tell me about growing up in Philly. And are you first generation or did you have family on the job?
So it's funny when you say the shadow. I actually grew up right outside of West Philadelphia in Upper Darby. Upper Darby borders West Philadelphia, separated by Cobbs Creek Parkway. So I was born and raised in Upper Darby, and born and raised, with the fire service always being a love of mine since I was a kid. I had some friends of the family that were Philadelphia firefighters, Philadelphia fire chiefs that we'll talk about in a little bit here. But just being a mile or two from the border where I grew up, Philadelphia was always one of the places, one of the big cities that, I wanted to hopefully one day work for. And eventually it worked out that way.
Yeah, and as somebody told me, there's nothing like, and this is not knocking anybody who works in a town, you can be very busy in a town as well. There's plenty of towns across the country that have a high call volume. But as somebody who is retired out of a city here in the Northeast mentioned, there's nothing like being a city fireman. It's just the action's different, especially depending on where you are. The call volume is different. What you see and experience, again, doesn't necessarily have to be the call. It's just the ambience of the city makes for a very, very fun career. Now, again, diving into that momentarily, you were a volunteer for a while, and your uncle was involved in that as well. So the basics of the fire service are often incorporated through the volunteers, and if you live outside of a city as you do, it's often a stepping stone to get to a city fire department. So just tell me about learning the basics there and how that would help you once you got to Philly.
Yeah, absolutely. So Upper Darby, like you said, it's a great fire department. It was a great place for me to cut my teeth as a junior firefighter in those early, very formative years. And it's still a great place. They catch work, they catch emergencies. They're into training. They've grown. When I was a volunteer there back in the early 2000s. There was only a handful of career firefighters. They've since grown into pretty much an all-career fire department. There are still some volunteers, which is great. So they're doing great work. But yeah, so my story begins when I was a kid. Growing up a couple blocks from the Highland Park Fire Company. My uncle was involved in the firehouse, and all his friends. So it was in my life since I was a young kid. Ever since I could walk and talk, it's all I've wanted to do. It's all I've ever known. And as I got older, that desire just got stronger. So I was always hanging out in the firehouse. I remember, they would get runs, and I would run up the street out my backyard and watch them, respond down Westchester Pike, thinking, I want to be there one day. So the moment I turned 16, I joined Highland Park as a junior firefighter. Actually one of the first junior firefighters that they had. They didn't have a program prior to that. Myself, Jason Duke, and Emma Bravest were the first three junior firefighters, and it was absolutely wonderful. The guys took me in at a young age, and I would say they gave me two educations on how to grow up and be a man, and how to be a firefighter. Guys like John Dix, John Lynch, John Reach, John Anthony, Bob Adams, Jeffrey, the list goes on and on. Dave Burns, Dennis Noonan, and then right down the street at Cardington Stonehurst Firehouse, which backs right up to West Philadelphia. There was even more phenomenal firefighters down there that taught me how truck work is supposed to be done. That's where I learned to cut roofs in that neighborhood. Guys like Billy and Brian Norris, Mike Kubler, Joe Epbright, Lou Epbright Sr., Eddie Kubler, just phenomenal people. So it was a great way to start my career, and it just drove home that passion that I had. It only got stronger for me.
Right. And going into academy in 2005, summer of 05, as a 22-year-old with a little bit of experience underneath your belt, and learning as you did during that time. Academy's short, but it's also long, and you know exactly what I mean. Any recruit that's ever done that knows exactly what I mean. And it is something that doesn't necessarily push you to your breaking point. Sometimes it can push you past it. It's a real test in developing the mental fortitude needed for a job like this, where you're going to be in high pressure situations, and you're going to be in those high pressure situations, depending on where you work, very, very often. So we'll take it step by step here. Just being a member of the cadet class in that summer of '05, which was just under 4 months for you. Tell me about what that first day was like, and then gradually just trying to get acclimated to the environment and ultimately just pushing through.
Yeah, so you talk about the academy being long. When I went through, it was 18 weeks. We're up to about 9 months now between National Registry for EMT, which takes a lot of time, and then your firefighter training. So 18 weeks seems like a blink of an eye, thinking back on it.
Yeah.
But before that, one other thing I wanted to share was, September 17th of 2004 was kind of a turning point for me. Went through a personal tragedy where I lost a dear friend of mine, Kevin Collins, who was a firefighter as well at Highland Park. The incident occurred down the shore, Wildwood, New Jersey, firefighters weekend. He passed away down there, and he was always the one that told me, take as many tests as you can. Fire and police test, every civil service test you can get your hands on, take it for the practice. And I did that. I took that advice. I tested everywhere. And he always told me, he said, you're going to get hired in Philly. We used to go buff Philly together. We get in the car and drive down to West Philly and sit out front of 57s, engine 68, engine 41. And he would say, you're going to get on. So he tragically passed away in September. That May of '05, I got my letter that I was getting hired. And I cried when I got that letter. I was thinking of him and, just what an experience that was. And then I did what they tell you not to do. And I immediately quit my job. I was working at a mortgage company at the time. And I was like, you know what? I quit. But the academy was starting in July. That letter was a conditional offer of employment. I had already finished, all the other requirements, the background, the physical, all that stuff. So, I hit the ground running. I used that time to continue to get in shape and study, and still being at the volunteer firehouse at Highland Park, where I spent all my time for years, any chance I had, I was up there. So, so entering the academy in July of '05, July 18, 2005, class 180, it was quite the experience. The first days were kind of a blur. I can remember lining up at the gate, waiting to be let in, that nervous excitement, in the pit of your gut. But it was great. I really, I enjoyed the time there. It was physically and mentally demanding Monday through Friday. I had moved into the city prior to that. We have a residency requirement. Well, we had at the time a residency requirement. So I was living in the city, living down in Fairmount, not too far from the fire academy. But it was wonderful. I met so many great people, lifelong friends. Ernie Barilli, Jeff Neary, Gino Arroyo, guys I work with now like John Bell. So many guys that we all went through it together. We got through it. We succeeded as a group, and it went great. I had phenomenal instructors like Teddy Mlodzinski. Both of his sons are on the job. I work right now with Brandon he's at Ladder 12, which is in the house I'm in. I worked in West Philly with his other son, Teddy, Jimmy Muir, Frank Hannon. These are guys that I still work with today. They're chief officers now. They were lieutenants at the time, and now they're chief officers with me. And, it's great. They were my instructors, and my first experience with the Philadelphia Fire Department. Charlie Grover, another wonderful human being. He passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh.
They set us up for success, and it was great.
Yeah, it's nice to have that. I mean, obviously, again, there's that paramilitary discipline that has to be instilled in individuals who aren't familiar to the fire service. Obviously, if you're familiar with the fire service, maybe you're lateraling from a different department, or you have guys that were in the military prior, they get that. But I'm not on the other side of it yet. I do want to be someday, and I'm sure that day will come soon. I just got to keep working hard for it, like we were talking about off the air. But a colleague of mine described it as a type of fun you never want to have again. You look back on it fondly because it made you who you are today, and it laid the groundwork for what would come later, as we'll discuss tonight. But I'm sure, and this is for anybody who's ever completed a police or a fire academy, saying to themselves, thank God I never have to do that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure at the time I wasn't saying I loved it, but looking back, it was a great experience. And like I said, Mike, I wish you nothing but the best. You know, I can't wait to hear that you're in. You know, I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, it was great. It was, you know, looking back, it was a lot of fun. But at the time, it was a lot of work, physically and mentally exhausting. Like you said, the paramilitary aspect of it. But you know, they did it right. They set us up for success before we went out into our firehouses, into our assigned companies.
Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about it too is being in a type of department that runs its own academy, which Philadelphia is big enough to do. I mean, again, there's still NFPA standards to be followed, obviously, but for the most part, you're doing it to the Philly standard. You know, you need to do it to the Philly standard, obviously, since that's the place you're going to be spending your career in. And with that being said, I mean, it's ironic. One of the companies you buffed was 57 Engine, and that's where you spent almost the first 6 years of your career. So getting there as a rookie, getting acclimated, you talked about great instructors who set you up for success. Tell me about the senior guys in the firehouse who did the same for you once you got on the line.
It was a dream come true. I couldn't believe it when I got my assignment. So it was one of those assignments. It's a phenomenal company. It was, you know, it's always been known as one of the busiest. And I remember when I got it, you know, the instructor saying, you know, who do you know? You know, who got you there? And, you know, certain guys went to very busy spots. And, you know, you never want to give up your juice at the time. And I'm like, oh, that's where they're sending me. But, you know, I did have a lot of help. You know, it got out later, you know, that I had some pull with Chief Jim Grugan is his name. He's phenomenal. He was a family friend. And I used to go spend time with him when he was in Battalion 9 before I got hired, you know, right. and spend time at Engine 19, Ladder 8, Medic 28, Battalion 9 up in Germantown, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You talk about coming full circle. But so he was great. So he told me, he said, you keep your head low in school. You do great academically, physically, and I'll take care of you. He had one rule. He said, you're going to an engine. He said, out of school, you're going to an engine. There's no way. He believed that. And I believe that as well. You know, I think the engine sets you up to really appreciate ladder work, you know, down the line, to, you know, really appreciate timing, ventilation, and getting the engine in fast, you know, to forceful entry, you know, to get water on the fire. So that was his rules, you know, knock it out of the park in fire school, and you're going to an engine. So when the order came down, you know, engine 57, you know, cloud 9 to say the least. And you're right. You know, I used to buff there. You know, we used to sit out front. There's a parking lot across the street. We watch them go in and out on runs. Now here I am. I show up after graduation. Now I'm going to work there. I'm assigned there. So I show up there with, you know, I got all my cakes and desserts and everything, and I'm going to go in there and introduce myself. And I remember I was just, at that point, reality sunk in, and I was terrified. I'm like, I can't go in there and work with these guys. You know, and they go out, they made a run, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, all right, so when they come back, I got to get the courage to get out of the car. So they're backing in from the run. I get out, I get all my cakes, and I walk across the street. And right away, just, you know, welcome me with open arms. You know, naturally, they weren't going to make it easy on me, nor should they have. You know, right. I'm the new guy. But, you know, brought me inside. You know, it was the first time I met my senior man, firefighter Rich Leposki, absolute ace, had a huge impact on my career and my life. We'll talk about him. My first lieutenant, Vince Waters, I couldn't ask for a better first officer, you know, out of fire school. No nonsense type guy, let you know where you stood, but he took care of you. He, you know, every fire we went to, he would try to get us in there, you know, get some piece of the work if we could. Andre Harmon, Jerry Walker, these were the guys I worked with. And then in the firehouse itself, it was just full of phenomenal firefighters that had been there for decades through the busiest years. You had Frank Gale, Ralph Dietrich, Craig Bates, Joanne Rosansky, Jimmy DeVinny, Mo Hudgens, John Prendergast. I mean, the whole roster was just phenomenal firefighters. And now I got to learn from it. You know, I was just a sponge. I did not, I mean, obviously I kept my mouth shut. You know, I kept my mouth shut, kept moving, you know, made sure I was never sitting down unless told to do so. But I didn't let them know that I had any sort of previous experience. I didn't want that out there, not because I was ashamed of it. I'm very proud of my roots in Upper Darby and the way they broke me in, but because, like you said before, I wanted to learn the Philadelphia way, and I never wanted them to think I knew anything. Even when I heard things that I may have known, even from fire school, I think one of the worst things you can say is, "Oh, I know that." No, listen again. You're going to get it from a different point of view. And if it's the 50th time you heard it, great. Now it's going to be drilled into your head. So, like I said, I was a sponge. I ate it up. We were going to fires. We were going to a lot of runs, and the training didn't end. Every run was a training lesson. Every run was an opportunity to learn something new. Fire runs, medical runs. It was great. Everybody that I worked there with.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I preface this by saying I'm not making fun of any academy. You need the academy to set you up for what would come later. And obviously, you look back on fondly all these years later because you always fall back, as people have often said, on what they first taught you when you were going through that process. But let's be honest, too. And again, this is not a mockery. It's just a fact of the fire service. How many times across the country, not just in Philadelphia, does a rookie walk into a firehouse and somebody says some variation of, forget what you learned in the academy, kid. This is how we do it on the street. And again, are they knocking the academy? Not at all. But the way it's done in the street, especially as time progresses and conditions change and, the nature of the call, you don't know until you're actually there doing your size up, whether it be a medical, box alarm, or otherwise. Again, it's a different type of ball game. And every call is an education. When you have officers like that and senior men like that, I mean, part of you doesn't even want to look at them because you're so intimidated by them. Mm-hmm. But again, you talked about being a sponge. As long as they see that, even if they don't make it easy, again, firemen talk. They're like, you know what? I think this kid's going to work out. And sure enough, again, they invested in you. They saw that. And as time progressed, I'll ask you, I mean, especially after that first probe year was complete, when did you start to feel like, okay, I belong here. I'm glad I'm here. And I think these guys have really finally welcomed me with open arms.
So that's a good question. I don't know exactly when it happened. I know I'm not a big kitchen table talker to begin with at any time. I've always just been one to kind of lay back, listen, speak when I think it's appropriate. But I'm not sure exactly when it happened. Obviously it took a long time. But I do remember a time, I guess, as the firehouse transitioned, as all companies do, people were promoted. People, transferred. My senior firefighter transferred closer to home to slow down a little towards the end before he retired. These things happen. That's natural. So it was on me to step up. And the newer people that came in the firehouse, I by no means was considered myself a senior man, with 3, 4, 5 years on. But, what I always try to do then and throughout my career is I remember the way I was treated when I got in there. And that's the way, I tried to carry myself, just trying to teach the new members that came the way I was taught. I had a map book and a run book. Everybody in Philadelphia is required to drive the apparatus. Your driver training starts pretty much immediately. And, so I had a map book of the local, that I had wrote out, to memorize the area. So I made sure to pass that on, so slowly I started to leave my mark in the firehouse, I guess you could say, with some of this material. But, I started, right away as far as, trying to write stuff down to remember. I remember back, my first day, my first run, which was at 63rd and Walnut, right on my first run in the morning, 63rd and Walnut, right on the border of Upper Darby. Now I'm looking in the Upper Darby. I'm like, wow, like, is this real? Like, somebody pinched me, and then my second run would have been a first in job, but we missed it. We were on a medical run and we missed it. So right away, it was like, but there was plenty of work. I was very fortunate in that where 57s was situated in the city in West Philly, in particular, is in the between the 7th and the 11th battalions. We went everywhere. We had a busy local, and then our box local was even busier. So just through the years, and through change in the firehouse, and through runs, through experience, through fire duty, my confidence grew, and I just started taking on things in the firehouse, taking on if we were going to do something for the retired members to come back, trying to help out Johan Rosansky with the house supplies. That's a thankless job. But, just trying to help out in the house over the years. So I don't know exactly when it happened, but
No, just taking initiative.
it certainly became home.
Right. No, of course, especially because
I never wanted to leave.
Yes, it's just spending so much time with these guys, and you're going through thick and thin with them, quite literally. Naturally, that bond is going to build, especially as you show initiative and you do those little things around the firehouse well that add up ultimately to doing the big things well. Now, you were no stranger to fire, obviously. You started your fire service career at 16 years old, so by that time, you'd seen a thing or two, and not that you, as like you said, not that you were a senior man, but it wasn't something that you were necessarily foreign to. Nevertheless, I mean, working in a city, like we said earlier, is a whole different ballgame. So as far as your first structure fire in Philly, or just first major incident of anything, could have been an MBA or something of that sort, what was the first box or otherwise where you said, so this is what it's like here?
So it was immediately. So that second run, which was a job that we ended up missing, we would have been first in on. We did end up assigned to the box as like the fourth in engine. So right away, just, doing our job, which, every engine has predetermined assignments per our procedure. So our role was getting on a hydrant, stretching to the rear. So we were able to go through some of those motions, but, just being around those companies and knowing those companies and their reputations from being right across Cobbs Creek, it was like, wow, like I'm amongst giants, in 68s and ladder 13 and engine 40 ladder 4. Engine 5, ladder 6, engine 41, ladder 24, great companies. So it started right away. And then my first job ended up being my first night work in the firehouse. We do 2 day works, 2 night works, 4 days off. So my first night work in the firehouse, we ended up on a real good job. Like I said, our box area was busy as well. So we ended up third in on a job with engine 41 up at 63rd and Haverford. Real good job, storefront with apartments above. We had extension into both exposures. So there was enough fire to go around. Went for all hands and a couple special calls. But so that was my first introduction to really getting fire with the Philadelphia Fire Department. And it was a rush, what a ride, just being with those amazing people. We give the new guy or girl the tip, the nozzle right away. So I had the tip for the job, and my Lieutenant Vince Wooders was right behind me the whole time, encouraging me, talking me through it. And you're right, I had been to fires in Upper Darby, but this was still just a different experience,
Right. Absolutely. And again, it kind of paves the way for what would come later. Given that you made lieutenant in 2011, I did want to ask this, and I like asking this to guys that ended up moving up in rank on either side of the first responder aisle. Was that something that you had, given the mentors you had, both in Upper Darby and in Philadelphia, was that something you had in your mind kind of from the jump when you got on, or was that something that kind of came to you later? Like, you know what? I think I should start studying for this test.
Yeah, so it came later. I always stayed in the books. Like I said, I love the fire service. It's easy for me to read anything firefighting related. So I never, even when we graduated fire school, I never got out of the books. And we had a 1-year test where we had to go back to the fire academy. So I was always studying. Late night at the watch desk, we still have a member that has to sit at the watch desk. I would be up there studying. So it just kind of happened where I knew I was going to take the test and I knew I was studying, and it happened, so, and then I really enjoyed it, growing into that role as a lieutenant and then eventually moving up captain, battalion chief, deputy chief. I started to enjoy it.
Right. There is, again, it's not easy. A lot of studying goes into that, but ultimately when you're able to come out on the other side of it, it makes the process all the more rewarding. Because that's the thing too. You had enough time. I feel like 6 years, especially working in Philadelphia, is enough time to learn the engine like you talked about, because it made you appreciate truck work more, like you alluded to earlier, and also kind of get a sense not only from how you carry yourself, but again, the type of officers you have. Okay, you know what? That's how you do it. And when I get into that position someday, that's how I'll do it. Or I'll take some variation of what this officer's doing and I'll apply it to the given situation that it's appropriate to. So I feel like it molds you well, because depending on where you work, and if the city's busy enough, and Philadelphia certainly is that, for lack of a better way to word it, Chief, it forces you to grow up a hell of a lot quicker. And grow up you did in those 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back, I did have another plan in mind before the promotional list was published, and I did want to go to a ladder company. I had applied to special operations school. You needed 5 years on to apply for that. So I had other paths that I wanted to explore. I had worked a lot in the ladder companies between details, mutual exchange of tours with other members in the battalion, overtime shifts. So I had fire duty in the ladder company under my belt, but I was never assigned to a ladder company. So looking back, 5, 6 years in the engine, I did want to round that out with some ladder experience. It just didn't work out that way, but it's just the timing. It really came down to timing of the test. And the week that the list was published, I had actually spoke to the captain of one of the ladder companies in the battalion, Ladder 24, about possibly putting a ticket in to go over there. And it just didn't work. The lieutenant's list came out shortly thereafter.
And everything for a reason, right? Because you did end up ultimately getting a ladder company later on. Now, did you go? Because this is the thing that's interesting. For example, the FDNY has this thing where they do until further orders. You work around in different places as a new officer to get a feel. Did you go straight to Ladder 9 as a lieutenant, or were you covering for a little bit before you got there?
So we do have a pool on and off. We have a pool where you can be a covering officer, and this is kind of a funny story that I'll get into the way it played out. We call it TA, temporarily assigned. I wasn't aware that I was TA'd to Ladder 9. It was my assignment. There was no TA on the paperwork. So as far as I was concerned, I was assigned to Ladder 9. So I was actually moving into a new house in Overbrook Park when I got a phone call from the fire commissioner, Lloyd Ayers, to tell me, hey, the lieutenant's list is on my desk. I just got it from Human Resources. You did very well. You're going to get promoted very soon. Congratulations. And I thought it was a prank call. I thought it was one of the guys from I'm like, oh, okay, Commissioner. And then I'm like, no, this is really him. So shortly after that, I was transferred to Ladder 9, Engine 57, Lieutenant to Ladder 9. And, going in there without that ladder experience necessarily, assigned as a firefighter, look, and people talk, I did my homework about Ladder 9, and I'm sure them guys did their homework about me. That's natural. That's the way the fire service works. Everybody wants to know how much time do you have on and where did you work? Those are the basic questions. So going in there, I understood not only was I going to a ladder company, not only was I a new lieutenant, I was going to Center City, which it was downtown firefighting. You want to talk about the big cities, big city firefighting now.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different ball game than what I was used to out in West Philly, where everything was 2- and 3-story row homes, single family dwellings, apartment houses. This was a whole different ball game. We had the subway, the rivers, the highway. So I really had to step my game up. So I went in there and right away, from day one, I brought the guys out on the apparatus floor. I feel like the office is for official business. The apparatus floor is where we really have our conversations about operations. And I said, look, fellas, it's no secret. I got promoted out of an engine in West Philly. This is all new to me. Ladder company work, being assigned to a ladder, being assigned to Center City, being a new officer. So I'm going to do my job and keep you guys safe. And, you're going to teach me as well. I might be the lieutenant, but I'm going to learn a lot from you as far as ladder company work goes, working downtown in the high-rise district, elevator operations, whether it's operations on a fire ground, using the elevators in a high-rise, removing people from stuck elevators, which was 5-6 runs a day typical that we would respond to. That was all new to me. So they taught me. I learned as much from them as hopefully I passed on, a little something to them as well. Guys like Charlie Green, who was the senior firefighter there, he was first into the Meridian fire where we tragically lost 3 people back in 91. He was first in ladder firefighter that night. I had Richie Rogers, Brian Doneth, Denny Hart, Jimmy Hegarty, Keith Davis, Dave Keller were across the floor in Engine 43. Just great people that, they welcomed me with open arms as a new lieutenant and said, don't worry, we got you, boss. You're downtown now. You're out of your element. You're out of West Philly, but we're going to show, we're going to set you up for success. And then I had another individual I want to mention, Jimmy Gibson, Gibby, great guy, larger than life, phenomenal firefighter, had a great reputation. He was in Westville. He was a 57s guy. I always heard about Gibby when I was out there at the kitchen table. Finally got to meet him, got to work across the floor from him. He was a lieutenant in the engine, and all the stories were true. Absolute sweetheart, loved to have a good time. We went out and had a lot of great times together. Unfortunately, he passed away suddenly in 2016. It was terrible, but I just wanted to put his name out there. He was, phenomenal guy. I had met him through a friend from up at Arby, Tommy Thornton. You talk about how big the fire service is, but how small it is to, the people that you meet throughout the years and you end up working with and becoming friends with, So them guys, Ladder 9, they really set me up for success. Great firehouse, really is. I really enjoyed being a Center City fire officer, chief officer. We'll talk about that. But I really enjoyed it. And I got to learn the ladder while I was there.
And given the amount of high rises in that district, I mean, again, it may seem like a silly question on its face, but again, not knowing too much about Philly, this is why it's great that you're here. How much of an emphasis on standpipe operations?
A lot of emphasis on standpipe. So as the years went on and I became the chief of training, we reevaluated and rebuilt our entire operational procedure for high-rise firefighting, really honed in on standpipe operations because that was such a problem at the Meridian fire, amongst other problems. That was just a cascading list of failures that night. Everything was working against the fire department that night as far as building systems go. They gave it their all. I mean, they left it all out there, but it ended terribly. We rely on the building systems and high rises, and they failed that night for sure, the systems. And ultimately the fire was extinguished by the sprinkler system once it hit the floors that were actually sprinklered. But that's a whole other story for another time. But there was a big emphasis on it. And standpipe operations, that at the time, that was new to me. So I would work in the engine, go out with the engine. We would do drills, engine ladder, bring out the perimeter engine and ladder companies. And it's tough to flow water out of a standpipe in Center City. Nobody wants you hooking up to their standpipes in that district. But we certainly did a lot of training, a lot of educating while I was down there. And it was every day was a new lesson learned for sure. And then like I said, we rebuilt that procedure years later. A wonderful group of people came together. I was just a facilitator as the chief of training, and they knocked it out of the park. They really stepped our game up in terms of standpipe operations.
And the thing is, too, urban development in any given city is great, but it's a tall order for the fire department because you've got to keep up with it. A lot of building inspection, and again, more of an emphasis, like you were saying, on these operations because you have to stay a step ahead because the worst day inevitably is going to come. And it can be the smallest of things that can cascade. It could be a kitchen fire that all of a sudden takes a turn for the worse. It could be, an activated fire alarm with water flow. Okay, why is the water flowing? Where is this coming from? Broken pipe. You never know. So with these buildings, even if they're being enforced with stringent building codes, still it creates a big challenge. But a challenge certainly the ladder companies, including Nines in Philadelphia, and particularly in that district, were certainly up for.
Yeah, I remember one tour. It seemed like every run that we went on was something just crazy. It was a person under a train, and then it was, a blind shaft stuck elevator removal, and then it was a car hanging off, one of the bridges, potentially going over into the river. And then we get a run for a water leak, which is a pretty common run. And we get into this high rise and there's water pouring into the lobby. And I shine my light up into the elevator shaft. There's water dumping down from a broken pipe from 20, 30 floors up into the elevator pit. It was a mess, and I remember thinking, like, man, can I just get a bedroom fire? Something cut and dry, like
Ruben contents.
West Philly, just in and out, go back to the kitchen table, have some coffee, talk about it, break chops. No, it was just everything was an operation. But looking back on it, I learned so much. I speak to the new officers in our officer apprenticeship program, and I tell them, you're going to end up downtown in the 4th Battalion. Embrace it. It's a great place to learn, especially if you're looking to move up the ranks. You want to move up to captain, battalion chief, deputy chief. You should have some 4th Battalion experience under your belt. Every day is a new curveball and a new learning experience.
How many battalions in the city in total, Chief?
There are 13 battalions spread out under 3 divisions.
Okay. And this is a question from Joe Malik. I guess as far as staffing is concerned on the given engine company and truck company, how many guys? 3, 4?
So we run an officer and 4 in a ladder, officer and 3 in an engine. So you end up with 4 in a ladder, or 4 in an engine, five in a ladder. The roster's heavier, like on any. We work at A, B, C, D platoon chart. We will if the platoon, we'll say the A platoon is officer and 4 and an engine. If everybody's working, one member will be detailed to another company for that particular shift.
Okay. And do you have 2 on an ambulance, or is EMS separate?
So EMS is part of the Philadelphia Fire Department. They're housed in the firehouses. It's all under the same umbrella. We have approximately 3,000 members. That includes our paramedics and EMTs. And they ride two in an ambulance. We have 63 medic units mixed between ALS, BLS. We do have some firefighter staffing in the medic units.
Yeah, so it's a pretty well-staffed department, 13 battalions across the city, like you said, for those 3 divisions. So Philadelphia is definitely well-served, and it's never a bad problem to have too much manpower. You know, you'd much rather figure out, where am I going to send this guy for the tour, as opposed to how am I going to figure out how to fill out the roster. So it's definitely a nice problem to have for the Philadelphia Fire Department. Now, sorry, go ahead, Chief.
No, you're right. You know, and I was just going to say, talking about balancing the numbers and the staffing, that's a daily thing. Happens multiple times. Most of my day as a chief was spent, moving bodies around. People go off, holidays, vacations, sick, whatever the case may be. And it kind of leads into, if we were going to talk about how, I said I thought I was assigned to Ladder 9 and not T8. That all came out during doing numbers one day with my chief. Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. Go right into it. Whatever you want to talk about, Chief.
So I've been in Ladder 9 for almost a year. And like I said, I was loving it. The runs were crazy, the emergencies, a little bit of fire duty. We were certainly catching some work. And my chief comes in one day and we're doing the projected staffing and numbers. And he's going down the list and he gets to the following tour on our shift. And he says, all right, Luke, next tour coming back. Your officer vacancy and 4. So I'm like, Chief, I don't have a vacation next week. I'm not off. And he's like, no, I got a note here. You're transferred. I said, what do you mean I'm transferred? He says, yeah, you're transferred effective April 9th, 2012 to Engine 54. And I said, well, how did that happen? I didn't put a ticket in to go anywhere. I want to stay here. And he said, well, I don't know either. I got a note. Let me make a phone call. Well, unbeknownst to me, he was calling the Deputy Commissioner of Operations at the time, who was in charge of the transfers. And he says, yeah, hey, Chief, hey, Commissioner, I'm here with Lieutenant Bompadre, who he doesn't know. He has no clue who I am. And he says he's transferred next week to Engine 54, but he's assigned here, what's going on? And he must look it up. And he goes, put him on the phone. So he hands me the phone. So now I'm on the phone with the Deputy Commissioner of Operations. And I'm like, yes, sir. And he says, yeah, what's going on? What's the problem? You're transferred to Engine 54. I said, I know, but I didn't put in any paperwork to go to Engine 54. He said, well, you're not assigned to Ladder 9. You're TA'd. So you go where you get put. And I said, well, I didn't know that I wasn't assigned to Ladder 9. And he said, well, you're going to Engine 54. And he goes, what's the problem? He said, I looked where you live. You live in that area. I said, yeah, I do. I said, but I don't mind driving to work. I'm thinking, like, who wants, maybe I can stay down here if nobody wants to go to Ladder 9. But the officer whose spot I took, he was coming back. That was a whole other story. And he says, well, he goes, you're going to 54, so I suggest either get a bike or a good pair of running shoes and good luck. So that was it. So I had to go out and tell the guys, hey, I didn't do this, behind your back. I love it here. I love you guys, but you're going to be fine. You survived before me. You're going to survive after me. And thank you for showing me the way. And off to Engine 54 and Overbrook I went.
And again, closer to home. And it would have been nice to know, as the guy that took the assignment, by the way, this is temporary, but big city fire department, big city things. And that's not said mockingly. It happens sometimes. It gets lost in translation. That's anything in the fire service or the police service by extension. But going back to an engine company, I mean, again, even though you love Ladder 9, You spent the first 6 years of your career over 57, so you had to feel right at home. Different spot, of course, front seat this time, front passenger seat next to your driver, but engine operations was your bread and butter for such a long time. I imagine even though coming back as an officer is different, it was an easier transition.
Yeah, so eventually I knew I wanted to get back to an engine. I guess it was just the way that it happened. And Engine 54 is a great company. It's back in West Philly. It's in the 11th Battalion. We used to run in with them when I was at 57s. Very familiar with the area. Like the commissioner said, it was my neighborhood where I was living. So I knew what I was getting into. I knew the members. So I was going to go there, and embrace it, love the one you're with. So this is my new spot. And that's the way I approached it. I remember the first morning I started, due to unfortunate circumstances. So that morning, early on, before the shift started, I went to the gym. I figured I'd get a workout in before I get to the firehouse. So I'm at the gym. I see this 5-alarm warehouse fire going on in Kensington. And I'm like, oh, look at that. They got a good job. And I'm thinking 54s won't be there because they're on the edge of the city, so they don't move to cover up anybody else. If anything, they get covered if they're out of service for a set amount of time, just because it butts up to Lower Merion off City Avenue. So I'm figuring they won't be there. So I go home, I get showered, I get changed, I get to the firehouse, and everybody's in the kitchen. They're listening to the radio, and I said, hey guys, what's going on? They said, oh, hey Lute, how you doing? Yeah, got this warehouse fire in Kensington, and ladder 10 is buried. Now, it doesn't process with me because from the news, it looked like the fire was under control. So I said, oh, that's going to be a long memo, thinking the apparatus was buried. Maybe they were parked in a collapse zone. It turned out, tragically, it was the members. And we lost Lieutenant Bob Neary, firefighter Dan Sweeney that morning. It was a terrible morning. And I remember the date, because April 9, 2012, because it was the day I walked in the 54s. And, one of my first orders was, hey, guys, I'm the new Lieutenant, Tony Bompadre, and we got to hang up the Black Bunny, for Bob and Dan. So, just wanted to remember them, put their names out there. It was a tragic time.
Ah, man, I'm very sorry to hear that. And again, it doesn't process like you said, because if I heard the same thing, I think, oh, yeah, the apparatus got caught in it. I guess they're going to have to send the truck to the shop. But no, it shows the danger. You never know. You never know what's going to happen tour to tour. And that morning that you just explained was certainly no different. Spending time, though, in 54 engine, tell me about the district and the type of work you guys would catch. Was it a lot like 57s in terms of the contents of fire you were seeing?
Parts of the local. The rest of the local was big single-family dwellings, a lot of apartment buildings, very diverse in building construction, that area. We had City Avenue, so we would get a frequent amount of accidents. Sometimes we would work with Lower Merion. I knew some of the people over there, which was good to see people from other departments on runs. But a lot of their work, when they got first in work, it was good work. Big single-family dwellings. So it was good work when we got it. I was only there a couple months, which kind of segues into when I was assigned to fire school as a lieutenant. So after a couple months, I was enjoying it. I had a good crew: Alonzo Smith, Kevin Douglas, Mark LeBrun, Brian Houghton, Paul Greavy was there, who I worked with at Engine 60. He was at Engine 68 as a firefighter when I was a firefighter. So I had, I was enjoying it. A couple months in, went to a couple fires, and I got a phone call from Will Dixon, who was a firefighter at Ladder 24 when I was at Engine 57. He was one of the senior firefighters. He taught me a lot about ladder company work. He got promoted with me to lieutenant. He went right to fire school. So he called me and he said, hey, listen, why don't you come out of Engine 54 and come up to fire school? We have the cadet class starting, and I want you to teach engines. So I was a little hesitant because I hadn't taught up to that point. So I called another, I'll call him a mentor of mine, Ed Grugan, who is Jim Grugan's brother. And, I talked to him about it, and he told me, do it. You're going to love it. I talked to Jeff Mullen, who was my first captain, absolute gentleman, phenomenal firefighter. I love that man. And he told me, Tony, don't pass up the opportunity to go to fire school and teach. So I went up there and taught engines for the 186. I owe that to, Will for setting me up for success there. Unfortunately, Will passed away a couple years ago from cancer. Just great guy. Terrible circumstances, but such a terrific human being. So get up to fire school, and they were right. I loved it. At the time, I was still assigned to 54s, detailed to fire school as an adjunct instructor, but I really enjoyed teaching the cadets. I wasn't the one to yell and scream. We had drill sergeants for that. That wasn't me. That wasn't my style. I was the one that would pull you aside, teach, stay after class. If you needed help with something, set you up to get you squared away to graduate, because we're going to be working together. So I got to set you out there right. And we would get calls from the field, what are you sending us? So I took it serious. It's a big responsibility. I jumped in with 2 feet. I really enjoyed it. It was great. And that started me on the path to an assignment there. So after the class graduated, the deputy chief up there, Jesse Wilson, who again took care of me in so many ways that we'll talk about here. And that's what I love about the fire service. Like you get to meet people and you can take care of people and really make an impact on their career, go to bat for them in different ways. And he did that for me. So he took a chance in me and he said, I really like what you did up here with the class. I was watching you, and I want you to stay as a full-time instructor. Come out of the field, work this spot, basically Monday through Friday. We follow straight day works. We'll call. You're not in the firehouse unless you pick up extra shifts. So I said, yeah, because I really enjoyed it at the time, and I weighed the options. I said, go back to 54s and keep doing what I'm doing in the engine, which wouldn't be bad, but I can come up here and really step my game up. So I took the chance, and he gave me that opportunity. We had gone to St. Joe's together for our master's degree, so we were in the program together. So we got to know each other, and it was a great experience. I really enjoyed being up at fire school, teaching. I got to work with some great people. Jeff Cowden, who I had worked with in West Philly, he was a ladder 13. He's still one of my best friends today in the fire department. Jason Oakes, another phenomenal guy. Rich Prather, Hector Sierra, Dave Litchfield, Will Dixon. We were the full-time instructors up there, and man, we had a blast. We had so much fun. We some days we probably had too much fun. Training with the companies and bringing them up and getting to do live burns, and just getting to interact with units from all over the city. So with like I said earlier, we have 13 battalions. It's tough to know everybody everywhere. Sometimes you might not cross paths with anybody. You stay in your area for your whole career. You might not know people from the Northeast, but I got to know people from all over the fire department because we would rotate companies through fire school. So it was great. And then I had the amazing opportunity to serve as the class coordinator for Cadet Class 189. We typically push out classes of 100. That's usually the max that we'll do at one time. And so I got to be the lead for the class. You're basically the parent of the class. You get 100 new kids, and you're responsible for them from the moment they come through the gate to the moment they get out there. You mold them in, the way that you want them to be. You set the tone for the instructors. You approve the training schedule. There's so much that goes into it day to day. But to see them come from, the nervous, excited civilian end, standing on the other side of the gate, coming through the gates, suffering through the punishing PT and the academic rigors of it all, and then to come out, not only graduate, but now they're getting promoted. They're lieutenants and captains now. I try to make it to their promotions because, like I said, they were like my kids, and I'm so proud of them because I remember telling them, we would close every day. I would get to close the day. The instructors would all talk, and then I would have the last words and try to set them up. We would talk about line of duty deaths, the date, if it was an anniversary. We would talk about how to carry yourself in the firehouse etiquette, to set them up for success. And I told them, I said, I sat in your seat, and I got through it, and now I'm standing here talking to you as a lieutenant. I said, one day one of you will be standing up here. One of you is going to be a chief officer. One of you may be my boss one day. And the class that's in now, which is pretty cool, the class coordinator who's in that role is somebody from that class,
Wow.
Brad Forsyth. So I
Nice.
feel like give him a shout out. He's doing a great job from what I hear. Not surprised. He was an ace in fire school, and then he went out to West Philly to 68s and really hit the ground running. So it's so many great people that I've come across, and training was a big part of that. Absolutely. I'm so happy I went to fire school. It was really a great experience.
Yeah, and I mean, again, there's a relatability factor too, where again, as you said, and this is the case for a lot of cities that run their own. Pretty much every instructor you got there is someone that at one point was in that recruit role. Obviously, they got to be that instructor. They got to put on that hard line, and that obviously is going to create the respect needed. And we talked earlier about paramilitary values being enforced, but deep down, they know exactly what you're feeling. Those first few weeks, they know exactly what you're feeling, especially when it comes to the PT. And they know exactly what you're feeling. Of course, once you get to that level where you graduate, God, that I need to hear this because, like we talked about earlier, that'll be me in that chair at some point. So when I get out on the other side of it, I will look back at this conversation that we had tonight, Chief. And to your point about line of duty deaths, before I continue with something I wanted to ask you. Small world, John Costello, who worked DMS on the side, besides being a police sergeant, mentions that Danny Sweeney worked for him as a medic. And he obviously has a family in Philadelphia public safety. So the Sweeney imprint is well felt down there. So thank you for mentioning that, Sarge. Hope you're well. I know some schools, at least down here, do this where the instructors, depending on the severity, can respond to a box alarm as an incident safety officer or one of them. Can instructors down in Philly do the same thing?
So two things real quick. I'm so happy that he mentioned that. So Dan's sister, Susie, was actually, Susie Swedledge was actually in the 189, the class I taught. And Dan's father was on the job. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, to your point, it used to be that way. So before we had a dedicated incident safety officer, the captain from fire school would fill that role on a third alarm, I think it was, or second alarm. It's not the case anymore. In the case of extra alarm fires, we do suspend training during the extra alarm fire. And we have apparatus at school that can be equipped. So if we have to bring in personnel, which is rare, I think it might be like a fifth alarm where we start recalling personnel. We have apparatus at fire school that the officers can get squared away, ready to go out to the street. Doesn't happen a lot, but so there is still a response part of that. It's rare. But when I was up there, you could still work the field on your days off. You get called by the chief's aide for overtime or to go fill in a shift somewhere. So I tried to do that every time I worked in staff because I had two more stints in staff that we'll talk about throughout my career. I always tried to work the firehouse when I could just to stay involved. And staff really supports the field. So it was good to get back out there while in the staff role and hear from the members, hear their needs. Even when it came to training, like if I would go out there and work, the guys would say like, hey, we went up last week for that class on engines and it was great, but you should add X, Y, Z. That's a great idea, and then we would go back and add what they suggested.
And again, to your point, again, inclusiveness and that constant ebb and flow in the dialogue is what gets things done. Because again, in the fire service, it's key, and I've learned this from talking with guys like yourself and many others. You can never be married to the philosophy. Sometimes you can, because the philosophy is 100% right and applicable. But sometimes there's nuances to the situation or context of the situation, what you're talking about, that you didn't consider before, but somebody else did. And you blend that together, you get a great outcome, and it kind of really. It does definitely aid in moving the mission forward. You made captain in 2013. And in this 5-year period, from being captain ultimately to making battalion chief in 2018, you got the chance to work several different engine companies, 45, 19, 25, and ultimately the last one being 20 over in Chinatown. So familiarization with engine operations, as we talked about earlier, but nevertheless, and we'll break it down right now, each of those 4 companies you had in those 5 years, what did you most enjoy about each in terms of the guys there and the district you were in?
Yeah, so we rotate officers every 3 years, every 4 years. I'll talk about that in a moment. But so to backtrack, the 189 was in class. I took the captain's exam, did well, placed well. And typically when you come out at that time, when you come out of staff, you get to pick your assignment. You jump to the top of the list. So Jesse Wilson brings me in his office, and he says, I got the captain's list here. You're going to get promoted before the class graduates. Where do you want to go? This is another funny story with that deputy commissioner who told me to get my sneakers for Engine 54. So I tell him I wanted to give North Philly a try. I'd worked in West Philly, and I knew I wanted to go to an engine. My heart's in the engine. I love the engine. I really enjoy ladder work, and I appreciate it. But to me, there's nothing better than being in an engine company, as the firefighter on the tip, the officer, the backup, driving. I used to love driving the engine. Really enjoyed it. It was such a challenge and such a rush, getting there first in, not getting beat in, knowing where you're going. But anyway, so he tells me, where do you want to go? So I said, well, Engine 50 in North Philly, great company, which is where I'm assigned now. That's where the safety chief runs out of for the city. Had an opening, had a captain's vacancy. So he picks up the phone and calls the deputy commissioner in charge of transfers and says, hey, I got Tony Bompadre in the office. He's making captain. And he says, the deputy commissioner says, well, where does he want to go? And he said, Engine 50. And the deputy commissioner says, well, that's not happening. It's going to someone else. So tell him to pick again. So then now he comes off speakerphone, because it was like, all right. So we'll look at the list. Well, there was really, at the time, there was nothing open, but the class hadn't graduated yet. They still had a few tours left at school. So they put me at Engine 45, another great company, 45s, Ladder 14, Medic 25 in North Philly. Phenomenal place. They put me there on paper. I went and worked a couple tours there while I was still at school, but I knew I wasn't staying. In fact, on that one, on the transfer, I was TA'd. So it was just a placeholder.
This time you do.
Yeah. This time I knew I was TA'd. I made sure to ask. So I knew that there was going to be more movement. So I was only there for a couple tours. I put that in the bio for you, more or less just to acknowledge them, because it's a great house. It really is. So I knew I was going to go to Engine 19, which was incredible because, like I said, I used to go hang out there with Jim Grugan when he was Battalion 9 before I got hired. 19's Ladder 8, Battalion 9, Medic 28, up in Germantown in we'll call it the northwest section of the city. So now I get to go back there as a captain. How cool was that? So I loved it, and I loved it there. It was a great spot. I worked with great people. Guys in the engine like Anthony Granger, Franchot Robinson, we called him Poppy, Keith Oliver, Pedro Soto. I mean, these were great guys. They really were. And I loved it there. And to be working there from a place I used to hang out at as a kid was just like full circle, really cool experience. But an opportunity came up that doesn't come up often, and Engine 25 in the Kensington section of North Philadelphia was opening up. That captain was moving out. And I probably had like about a year at 19s, maybe a little less. And this is one of them opportunities, doesn't come around every day. You pretty much need a letter from the Pope to get in there as the captain. But I had Jesse Wilson, who said in that meeting when I couldn't get Engine 50, he said, well, if anything in North Philly comes up, let me know. So, well, something in North Philly came up, a phenomenal single engine. I like single engines. 57s was a single engine, smaller firehouse. It's just, that's the way I was broke in. That's what I'm used to. The full houses are great. Change of shift is a lot of fun, 20 some guys in the kitchen, but I like the single engine work. This was a great firehouse in the middle of a very rough neighborhood. Kensington's suffering from an opioid crisis. It's really terrible to see. But it certainly kept the firehouse busy. Engine 25, Medic 8 consistently ranks as one of the busiest medic units in the country, nonstop. And the fire duties there, a lot of vacant row homes, a lot of vacant house fire work. And more important than all that, the members are phenomenal. I got to work with Eric Fromhold, Dave Santiago, Sean Doherty, Stevie Jenkins. Stevie Jenkins' dad was a chief in West Philly. And when I got the assignment, he called me and said, hey, make sure you take care of my son. It's a big honor and a big responsibility, hey, take care of my son. But he didn't need to be, he was phenomenal. He didn't need to be taken care of. I did my best to watch out for him, but he hit the ground running. He's a lieutenant now. He's doing great things. He worked with me in logistics. But I loved it there. It was busy, fast paced, aggressive. The firehouse, like I said, is in the heart of the neighborhood. The firehouse had bullet holes in it, plywood on the windows. And, you talk about that saying, a great firehouse isn't made up by the apparatus or the building, it's the members inside. That's the place. The patch is simple. It's got a Dalmatian on it, tradition, and that's what they live by, tradition. It's a very traditional firehouse. One of the senior men there, Mike Conrad, his father was there. He was killed in the line of duty in a building collapse in 1984. So he worked. Now he worked in his dad's firehouse. His two brothers are on the job. Two great human beings, Joe and Jimmy. I had the pleasure of working with Jimmy out in West Philly. He was at Engine 16. He's still there. I just saw him the other day. Still loving it. He's the senior man over there doing great things for Engine 16. So, like I said, just a great place to work. And the North Philly, I wanted to try it out. Like, I love West Philly, but North Philly is it's a little more. We'll call it. I don't want to say aggressive because everywhere it's a little more cutthroat. We'll say that the firehouses are on top of each other in North Philly. So you make one wrong turn, you take too long to turn out, you get stuck behind a double parked car, you're out of the game, and the other company is not forgiving. They're going to cut you off if they can't. It's a different type of firefighting, and I wanted to try it out. I wanted to see what it was all about. West Philly was more of a gentleman's game where the companies were a little more spread out, but we still had to be on our A game in West Philly, because if we gave the other engine, an opportunity to get us, they would. But I wanted to see what it was all about, and I really enjoyed the, when it's healthy, it's good because it keeps you on your toes. You better know your local. You better know how to stretch. You better know how to stretch line quickly and efficiently because they're coming for you. They're right on your back. I remember going back to work an MXT for an officer at Engine 57, John Diaz, who was one of my officers when I was there. Great guy. Can't say enough great things about him. I wanted to mention Sean Glenn, too. He was one of my lieutenants when I was at 57s. Another phenomenal firefighter, fire officer. He always got us in the mix. He was a SOC firefighter. He was in heavy rescue. So we would get on scene, and he would find a way to get us in service, which I really loved. But I go back to 57s one day and I'm working, and now I'm in that North Philly mindset, when in Rome. So I'm in that mindset, and we get a box run, and with 68s, we're first in, they're second in. And I can see their lights. We're heading south on 62nd Street, and I can see their lights coming north, coming at us. And I tell my driver, I said, if they make the turn and cut you off, I want you to make the turn and pull up on their bumper and, this and that. And I'm ready to battle it out with 68s. And the driver kind of gives me a look, Eric Franks, who's driving, great guy. And he kind of gives me a look like, all right, but they're not, why would they do that? So we get to the intersection, they wave us in, you got it. And we get there and it's nothing. It wasn't a fire. So we put it under, and we're going back to the firehouse. And he's like, "Hey, Cat, I think you're spending too much time in North Philly. You need to come home to West Philly." I don't know why you thought 68s would do that, but 25 is great. Great place to work. But like I said, we rotate every 3-4 years. So off to Chinatown, Engine 20. I went Engine 20, great firehouse in the heart of Chinatown, back in that downtown 4th Battalion area. Everything is a challenge down there. But I got to work with some great people, Bill Culp, Tom Jardell, Kevin Doran, Gino Capobianchi. That was my crew in the engine. And they were just, they were phenomenal. And I really enjoyed it there. I had taken the Chief's test when I got down there. I knew I was looking to get promoted to Battalion Chief. But in the meantime, I was going to enjoy Chinatown. The neighborhood is great. They take care of themselves. Chinatown runs itself. We were very tight with the community. I used to love Chinese New Year, working for that. They would take over 10th Street and have a big party, and they loved us, and the Reading Terminal was in our local. It's like food heaven. Mike, you ever get down to Philly, I'll take you to the Reading Terminal.
We're going to make that happen.
We're
going to make that happen.
I love it. So we would go over there to get our food. I had a lot of fun down there. And, speaking of the community, Sometimes, when I was a captain, I would, to take care of the fellows, I would work off of it's probably better to ask for forgiveness than permission when they wanted to do some things in the firehouse, as long as it wasn't too crazy. And we got a new engine, and they wanted to put a dragon on the front of the engine. We were the House of Dragons. So, and we have a really cool mural painted outside. You can look it up online. But said, hey, Cap, can we put this dragon on the new engine? They were so proud to get a new engine. They hadn't had one in a long time. So I said, yeah, you know what? Do it. Yeah, and, as long they were just going to wire tie it. They weren't going to drill into the truck. Nothing crazy, So they put it on there. Well, it gets downtown, and one of the deputy chiefs paid me a visit, and he's like, hey, you're not supposed to have this. I said, yeah, but the community loves it. I mean, they put it in their there's the mural outside of the firehouse. That's
cool. Now that's cool.
It's a really cool firehouse. And so he comes in, and I knew he was coming. I got on the phone call. I got downtown, saw the truck. Okay. So he comes in. I said, Chief, like the community, they love this. If you take it off, it's going to rip the community up. So what can we do to make it right? And he said, just put the paperwork in the way it's supposed to go in. And then when he was walking out, he says, it's pretty cool, by the way. And he was a member there. I think he was a firefighter there like 30 years prior to this. And he's like, it's pretty cool. He's like, once a dragon, always a dragon. So that was pretty funny. That was a good time, good experience down there.
And to your point on North Philly, actually, before I get into that, let me highlight this question from Mitch Stern earlier. You were talking about EMS. He just wants to know. He worked New York City EMS for a long time. How does EMS and fire get along?
We have our challenges, like any family, but we're in house together. It's, I don't think it's that way in New York. I don't believe, but I can speak from my own experience that, they're part of the company. As far as I'm concerned, they're part of the company. They're assigned to the engine officer. So even though they're in the ambulance, they're assigned to us. And they're so busy. It's so hard to get back for a meal. The members of the companies try their best to have food ready for them to come back, even if it's just on the apron of the firehouse. To just, sometimes they're changing over and off to the next run. They can barely get time to change over personnel. It's a very busy EMS system. So we do the best we can.
All right. And again, like you said, I like how you put that. Family has its challenges, but still love at the end of the day. You're there for each other. You support each other. So I didn't want to ignore that question, Mitch. Thank you for submitting it. Before I get to you making battalion chief, though, I'm glad you mentioned North Philly, because I recall a conversation I had with Jeff Cool, retired out of FDNY Rescue 3, where, he was talking about how someone took exception to him saying, yeah, he was a ghetto firefighter. And he wasn't saying in terms of how he carried himself. Not at all. He was just talking about the neighborhood. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. It's a term of endearment. You're not happy to see the neighborhood struggle, but you take pride in working in a neighborhood like that because, like you said, it was the same thing in Chinatown, same thing there. The people love you. And every time you have those experiences with them, rather be a little kid swinging by the firehouse who wants to go on the truck, or just a family, a mother, a father thanking you for what you do, it reminds you not only why you do what you do, but who you do it for. Man, most of those people in that neighborhood, they're good, honest people. It's a small percentage that makes it untenable at times. The majority of the people you're serving, you're really, really happy to serve.
Some of the greatest people civilian citizens that I've interacted with are in the toughest neighborhoods.
Yeah.
They really are. Caring, compassionate people. It's to work in those neighborhoods. It was a challenge. It was an honor, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. They often say the hardest transition is, with two of them in the fire service, is firefighter to lieutenant or sergeant, because some departments have sergeants. In Philly's case, lieutenant, and then captain rather to battalion chief. You've done both in your career. So just tell me about that transition where you'd been an officer to this point by 7 years. That wasn't foreign, but the chief's level is a whole new ball game. And now 7 years as the chief, but just getting to the battalion at first, how long did it take to get used to that? And much like the guys helped you through when you first made lieutenant over in Ladder 9 and later Engine 54, how did the guys in your battalion help you out here?
They were great. I agree with that statement. Those are the two most difficult transitions for sure. The one thing I'll say about battalion chief is our captains can serve as acting battalion chiefs. So I did have that experience as far as I've been in charge of some fire grounds up to that point. But when you're actually promoted and the chief, it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
I was fortunate because right out of Chinatown, I was assigned to the pool, Division 1 pool, and in Division 1 is Battalion 4, one of the battalions in Division 1, and that's where Chinatown was. So I knew everyone. I knew it was a temporary assignment, but I knew everyone that I was going to be working with. They knew my leadership style. They knew who I was. I'm a big fan of, saying, I work with people. I don't really say people work for me. We work together. And that goes back to my experience at Ladder 9 in the 4th Battalion, where we all work together. I'm the officer, I'm in charge, but we're going to work together. But they embraced me with open arms. I did obviously switch platoons down in the 4th Battalion. Again, great place to work. It was a challenge. Every tour was a challenge. We have chief's aides. They're worth their weight in gold. And my aide was great, Chris Stewart. He was another West Philly firefighter for years. Now he's an aide down there. He's retired now. I hope he's doing well. But he was great to have. He really showed me the way, as an aide, like, hey, chief, this building we come in this way. This building we do this. And one funny story about him is when I get there, I'm doing the roster, and it's my name and his name. We're on the D Delta platoon, and I see next to his name 9683. Well, that's my birthday, 9683. So I said, hey, Chris, I think they screwed up the roster downtown. They have my birthday and your appointment date mixed up. They have 9683 as your appointment date. He's like, that is my appointment day. He's like, you're telling me that, the day I was sworn in as a Philadelphia firefighter is the day that you came into the world? He's like, it's time to retire. But we got a good laugh out of it. But he was great to have. So that transition was made a little easier because I was familiar with the players in all the companies. And I did have some crazy jobs while I was down there. I did want to talk about a couple of those.
Please do.
So leading up to that, 2018, on January 6, 2018, we had suffered another terrible loss. We lost Matt Latorno in a building collapse in North Philly. He was working in Engine 45. I knew Matt from our Delaware County days. Matt was a volunteer out there. He was an instructor at the fire school. He got me into their fire school as an instructor years later. He was a firefighter in Engine 43 across the floor from Ladder 9 when I was a lieutenant. So our careers and personal lives seemed to always match up. Matt was super into the job. He loved the job. I thought I loved the job. He put me to shame the way he loved the job. And, he was big in with FSRI when it was early on in the research. And he would come back and he would tell us about this research that they were putting out. And we lost firefighter Joyce Craig in a basement fire a couple years prior to that. And he came back and said that fire was the Cherry Road fire in Washington, D.C., where they lost 2 firefighters. And then we had a wind-driven high-rise fire in the projects in North Philly. And he said, guys, this was exactly what happened on Vandalia Avenue. This guy, Dan Madrikowski, and the FDNY put out this whole program. So he was ahead of his time in Philadelphia. He was great. And I'm ashamed to say, at the time I kind of dismissed it. Like, Matt, I don't know if that's going to work here, but we'll figure it out. But he was, like I said, phenomenal firefighter. And then a couple years after his death, we ended up hooking up with FSRI and seeing his dream become a reality. But, I definitely wanted to mention him. So that was in January of 18. So February of 18, I'm a chief in the 4th Battalion. And we get a fire at 239 Chestnut Street. It's a 5-story building. It's an old loft building built in the 1800s, cast iron facade, heavy timber wood floors. It's a commercial on the first floor with apartments above. So that night was kind of typical for the Saturday night, typical for the 4th Battalion. We chased a couple of gas leaks. A couple high-rise boxes that were nothing. So I was in the office. It was like 3 a.m, and I was thinking about Matt's job. I was supposed to be working that morning. I had worked the day before. I had swapped shifts with somebody, so I didn't make the fire ground. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm listening to the audio on YouTube of his job, and we get hit out for this fire. So the whole way there, I had a bad feeling in my gut. I'm like, it was just something didn't seem right. Middle of the night, 4th Battalion. We pull up to this place. There's smoke showing from the ceiling level of the commercial on the first floor. Companies are getting there. I placed 2 engines, 2 ladders in service. Pretty typical for Philadelphia. We get a full box, 4 engines, 2 ladders, 2 chiefs. So I went with the first 2 engines, 2 ladders. They got in there, they knocked down some fire on the first floor, but I just had that nagging gut feeling the whole time that something didn't seem right. I knew I wanted to get into the cellar to check the cellar. And I had Kyle Waymeyers, Lieutenant Ladder 2, first in ladder officer. He's there. He's telling me trying to get in the cellar. Something seems off on the first floor. They think they have fire beneath them. Ray gets there in Rescue 1. He checks into the command post. Chief, what can we do to help out? I said, Bo, we got to get into the cellar of this place. So time passes, and when you're in front of a fire building, you get emotionally involved in these incidents. You can start losing track of time. When I went back and reviewed the tapes later, I was pretty surprised at the elapsed time that had already occurred. So things aren't improving. I'm not liking the way things are going. And I'm getting ready to back the companies out. We're going to regroup, figure out what's going on. And they get the Bilko sidewalk doors opened. And no sooner than they get them open, I leave the command post. I walk across the street to the sidewalk where the fire building is. And I look in, and the smoke is getting sucked violently back into the cellar. And I look up, and it was like somebody was dropping a curtain on the first floor. Just heavy black smoke from that ceiling that was probably like 8 to 10 feet up down to the floor. And I'm losing the members in the smoke. We had 2 engines, 2 ladders, and Rescue 1 operating in there. I give the order, evacuate back out. And the companies are coming out. They're coming out the storefront window. Now I see fire from the rear of the store. This place is flashing over in front of us. From the rear of the store, the first floor, I just see this fireball coming at the guys. They're trying to bail out. Now, this is happening in slow motion. I'm watching this occur. I'm seeing the guys come out one at a time, bailing out. 20s, Chinatown, my company. They're on the first hose line. They're the last ones out. Kevin Doran, Joe Olson, Bill Culp. They're the last ones to get out. No sooner do they hit the sidewalk, they're pretty much on fire at this point. Their gear smoking. The whole first floor flashes over. The fire blows out across the sidewalk about 10 feet. Like I said, everything's happening in slow motion. I had to snap out of it. You ever see those war movies? They drop a bomb and then the guy on the radio has to regroup. He's got ringing in his ear.
Shell shocked, yeah.
Yeah, shell shocked. That's what it was like. So now I knew I had to get par for the companies. We had a lot of people operating inside. Thankfully, one by one, I'm getting a par. Everybody's out. We dodged the bullet that night. No serious. The lieutenant was injured, but no worse than that. It could have been a lot worse. I estimated we could have lost a dozen guys in that flashover that were in there. So I tell that story off the Matt Latorno story because after the job, before we left the fire ground, I grabbed Bo Ray and Kyle Waymeyer. I said, what was going on in there? And they said, we didn't have a good feeling from the time this job got dispatched, much like I didn't have a good feeling from the time the job got dispatched. And they said when they got in there, they pretty much drew a line in the store and said, because this place was deep, it went back like 75 feet. Like I said, old city, downtown area, very deceiving. Nothing is as it seems. They said we didn't let anybody wander too far back. We knew we had to find access to the cellar from the interior. So they controlled the inside. That shows how critical the company officer's role is on these operations. They ran the inside of that place, and they saved lives that night. But they told me they had this gut feeling. So I leave. I walk back to the firehouse, and I'm relieved at that point. The firehouse was only a couple blocks away. So, this thing escalated to multiple alarms at that point.
Yeah.
And turned into an all-day event. So I got to sign off the computer. I go to sign off, and there's that YouTube video I was listening to of Matt's audio, and it hit me. I said, we had Matt with us looking out after us. That gut feeling that we had. I like to say, he was our angel on Chestnut Street that night. I had the feeling, Bo had it, Kyle had it. Like, this is not going to end well, so don't let your guard down. And it was quite the job that I had down there in the 4th Battalion.
And I'm glad you went into that. Thank you for telling both of those stories, and certainly the memories of everyone you've mentioned tonight who we've lost over the years is not forgotten. And that's the key. Like, if anything, you never want to lose anybody. Unfortunately, it's reality in the fire service. You're going to. But if anything good is going to come out of these tragedies, and we talk about it all the time on this program, you learn from it. What are the silver linings out of it? Well, you learn what went wrong and how can we avoid that. Here is a situation. While everybody's hearts are still hurting, while everybody's minds are still on, especially those that knew him like yourself, here we have another situation where it could have went bad. But you know what? Again, thankfully, because of the experience on your end, the experience in those guys, and just proper communication and coordination that night, we talk a lot about, especially in a post 9/11 landscape, the NIMS principles at these scenes. Everybody went home. And that's the end of listen, you want to put the fire out, but sometimes the situation being as untenable as it can get in a fire, especially one of multiple alarms, the main priority is make sure everyone goes home. And that night, everyone went home.
You're absolutely right, Mike. Absolutely.
Talking with Chief Tony Bompadre here on the Mike to New Haven podcast. This is volume 6 of the Best of the Bravest nationwide edition. And Darren Phillips, you mentioned it. Of course, you're a fireman in Canada, Darren. And most of you in this audience know Darren very well. He said he was caught in flashover way back. His ears still feel it. Thankfully, it was only a few seconds, but he mentions that was enough. And yeah, absolutely. It's a situation you never want to find yourself in. But again, going back to your academy training, you fall back on what you learned in the academy. And here you are 20 years into your career. It was a different perspective as an incident commander, but you fell back on some of those principles to be able to get your guys out. You went back to the fire school, this time in a different role. You talked about the training unit earlier, and you got the chance to spend a couple of years in that. This is COVID era, so it wasn't easy, especially 2020, 2021, which was the peak of everything with COVID. But nevertheless, being down there during that time and going into grants, and I love that because there's no shame in those federal grants if they're put to use. A lot of departments down here where I'm at in Connecticut utilize them, and God bless, that's what they're there for. If you can get that federal money and use it correctly and advance the mission forward, why not? But again, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of observation, and it takes a lot of networking. Even with the pandemic hanging over everyone and making things very complicated, to say the least, what did you most enjoy about that assignment? How were you able to get those grants going and get that networking going?
Yeah, so I loved it. I loved all my assignments, but this was a good one. So after Battalion 4, I was still in the pool. I went back to Battalion 7, which is where I started. That's 57's local. That's the battalion they're in, which was cool because now I'm in the office where all the chiefs that I looked up to, like Jerry Pradell, Mike Cram, Mike Arachi, these guys, that's where they worked. And now I'm in that office. So that was cool. Didn't stay there too long when Jesse Wilson called. You give a favor now, you get a favor. Now it's time to give a favor. He said, hey, remember when I got you assigned to 25s? Well, yeah, now I need you to go to the fire academy and run these grants and this newly formed field training unit. So I was like, okay, absolutely. I'll do it. I'm honored that he asked. And I knew how much I enjoyed fire school from the last time. So the field training unit was the big part of it, where at the time, all of our training occurred at the academy. So we would have companies coming up every day. Some of them would take an hour to get there in traffic. So we wanted to bring the training out to the companies when we could, forcible entry props, different elevator props. So I said, yeah, I'll absolutely be honored to lead that unit, but I want to pick my players. I want to pick people that I knew could operate and coexist in the field, in the firehouses, going in and putting companies out of service. And they had to have good reputation. So I went with Matt Rock as my captain. Matt, I knew him for a while. And Timmy DiNardo and Jimmy Carr, Kevin Donahue, Ryan Trudenick, these guys did a great job getting the unit up off the ground and running. They were already working on projects. And then we incorporated these grants. So the first grant was a command and control grant in 2019, 2020, well, in 2018, 2019. The next grant was 2020 and COVID. And funny story there. So we built out this command and control class using this digital combustion software, and it was looking great. And it was, real world scenarios from Philadelphia. We used all our buildings, all our apparatus. And we said, we'll bring in Chief Jim Smith, who was retired at the time. He was a Philly legend. He wrote a book, Strategic and Tactical Considerations on the Fire Ground, taught at the National Fire Academy. He was great. We said, let's bring in retired Chief Jim Smith to kind of vet the material. So the night before we bring him in, I decide to work a shift in Battalion 11 in West Philly. I can go right from there to this presentation that I'm going to deliver. And, what could go wrong? Well, we end up first in at a 4-story U-shaped apartment building. We initially thought we had fire in one apartment, but the fire took possession of the cockloft, burnt the roof off the place, went for 5 alarms. I'm there all night. Now I got to give this presentation to Jim Smith the next day, but I'm excited to do it, so I don't cancel it. And, like I said, I've been in love with the fire service since I was a kid. So growing up, when kids were, idolizing baseball players, football players, I was looking at Jim Smith, Leo Stapleton, Bob Hoff from Chicago, Vince Dunn. These were my heroes, growing up. And, now I get to present this to one of my heroes. Well, I will say it didn't go as well as I thought it would. Now I'm coming off of this 5-alarm job where I was the first in chief. I'm up all night in the freezing cold out on this fire ground, get a quick shower, go to the class. And really what it was he loved the format and the concept and the objectives, but the simulation software was new to him. So he's like, I don't know if that's really going to work. So the guys ended up breaking my chops. Like, you met your hero and he ripped you to shreds, and this and that. And it was all in good fun. We got the class up and running, and he came and sat through the class and told me, Tony, your guys did a nice job, and that meant the world to me that he did that. Chief Smith passed away a couple years ago. His son is a great guy. His son just got hired in a neighboring community as the chief from where I live now in Newtown Square. And, just comes from a great family. So we deliver that training, and right out of that training, we got into the work with FSRI and the Fire Safety Research Institute, what Matt had talked about. And that was with Dan Madrikowski, Steve Kerber, Chief Frank Lieb, Chief Pete Van Dorp from Chicago, Keith Stakes. Great guys. And they came in and they ran their boot camp for us and showed us, hey, look, we're not changing the way you do business. We're here to just give you more knowledge, more tools for the toolbox to keep you safer in an inherently dangerous job. There's no two ways around it. And that's what they did. And it was a great experience. And I remember when I gave the opening speech, we went back to Delaware County to deliver the class. I had everybody stand up and give Matt Latorno a round of applause because this was really his dream becoming a reality. And it was, the class was a success. I would say that we changed the culture of firefighting in Philadelphia. We got people thinking about why they do certain things. We got people to add flow path to their language. We got to have conversations about engine and ladder company coordination with ventilation on the modern fire grounds. I mean, it was great. It was difficult to deliver during COVID. Obviously, that was a challenge, but we brought in the right people. We got senior firefighters to buy in, like Charlie Scrillo, so many other officers. They went through the training first so they could be the messengers that we put out there with their credibility and experience and say, hey, this group at FSRI, they're doing great things, and they're going to make us even better. And that's really what happened. I can't say enough good things about those guys, all of them. It was such a great experience. I made, connections like we were talking about earlier, Mike, networks, just absolutely phenomenal. And then the proof really came out when we started getting reports from the field about, hey, this is the way we fought this basement fire. We had grade level access in the rear. Yeah, we absolutely held the first and engine up on the first floor. They controlled the door, and we attacked the fire from the rear on the same level. That was difficult before because we're a very aggressive fire department where to tell the first in engine, today's not your day, close that basement door, and that's pretty much all you're going to do for now, and give that fire up to the second in engine. Running your position, we really were able to hone that in. And I remember making a job not that long ago with engine 50, very aggressive engine. It was a church. They had one room going in a church. Ladder company was trying to force the front doors, and it was taking some time. It was a really fortified front door, so it just wasn't going to be a quick pop and open and get the line in. And they played the line from the street because it was appropriate at that time to cool that atmosphere and take the energy out of that room while they were forcing entry to get in, because that's really what we drove home in the class was, as far as the transitional attack and hit it hard from the yard, it got a bad rep. It wasn't an every time scenario, but for those times where entry was delayed, why are we going to stand out front and let this place free burn and let this room free burn and not put water in that space? Now, there's a way to do it, and that's all we did with the Philadelphia Fire Department. We said, here's another option. Here's another tool in the toolbox, another tool for the incident commander and his or her decision-making process to, when appropriate, not all the time, but the front door is wide open, bring the line in, get it up the steps, bread and butter job, what we do every day. But those times when entry is delayed, don't delay getting water into that space. And that was a home run, and it was great. Like I said, we owe that to Dan and Chief Frank Lieb, and the guys loved Chief Lieb. I love Chief Lieb. I know you know him well.
Yeah.
And it was you get firefighters together, they're going to break chops. He would tell us Ben Franklin started the fire department. That's what I hear. How do you know Ben Franklin went in, guys? How do you know he wasn't a firefighter that stood outside? So they were out in Indy the one year for the FDIC, and they send me this meme. They're like, hey, send this to Frank. And it's Ben Franklin hanging out of a second floor of a fire building, taking a blow. And he's saying, hey, Frank, grab a mask and come in. It'll be okay, buddy. Pretty funny stuff, breaking chops. And all these relationships were formed thanks to FSRI, and that was great. It was a great experience. I was happy to be the chief of training at the time. Like I said before, I just facilitated the courses and oversaw the movement and the staffing and detailing companies. I would speak to the classes when they came up about the why, how we got here. But I would love to name every instructor. They know who they are. So many of them. They did great. I can't thank them enough. They left their mark on the Philadelphia Fire Department. They absolutely left it better than they found it.
Absolutely. And thank you for going into that as well, because to your point earlier, you're not killing aggressiveness. Aggressiveness is still the name of the game for the most part in the fire service. And Philadelphia is very much not a hit it hard from the yard department. We see sometimes the memes fly around on Facebook and whatnot. Certain departments get a bad rap for it, not Philadelphia. But in certain instances, it's just a different perspective. And again, there's the old saying about firemen hate change and the way things are. But nevertheless, once you do it, it's kind of like a food that you didn't want to try at first. And you try, you're like, oh, this is so bad. I actually like it. Or a song that you always skip. Turns out you listen to the song one time, song's actually a great song. Here it is with this tactic. So thank you very much for going into that. And it's an interesting evolution for you, kind of getting closer and closer to where you are now. You make deputy chief, which from where you were in 2005 to here you are at this time in year 17, making deputy chief. It's quite the rise in a very short amount of time, and well deserved. It's been, like rocket fuel to get to this point. And before you ended up where you are now with my cousin over in safety, you were in logistics. And I feel like with a department like Philadelphia and the size of it, logistics pretty much encompasses everything. So you talk about an assignment where you had to use your brain and talk about putting your thinking cap on. You were there for a while. You were out in the field for a little bit too. I don't want to gloss over your time at Battalion 11, but just in regards to 11s, which you can talk about, and logistics, tell me about the transition between the two and what logistics entailed.
Yeah, so I joke. I went out to Battalion 11. I did my 2 years at in staff as the chief of training, and you can leave after that time and you get to pick your spot, as I said before. So I picked Battalion 11, West Philly, 5's Ladder 6, Battalion 11, they're known as West Point. It's a great house. And so I jumped on the opportunity, and I went there, and I joke, it was great. I had a great aide, Joe Burns. I was reunited with John Diaz, Jeff Cowden, Jason Oakes were some of my lieutenants in the battalion, great firefighters in-house. And I decided to mess all that up and take the deputy chief's test. We were having a blast. We were going to fires. We were having fun at the kitchen table. And I go and take the deputy chief's test and do well. And unfortunately didn't get to spend. I was there for a year and was promoted and off to logistics. So you're right. Logistics for a department of this size was very involved. But again, phenomenal people working in logistics. We oversaw all the apparatus, all firehouse maintenance. We oversaw all equipment, purchasing, research and development, all the training that went into that. And we were able to accomplish a lot because we brought in passionate people that wanted to just make the Philadelphia Fire Department even better. Some of the cool projects that I got to be involved in was we redesigned a new firehouse for Engine 57. They're getting a new firehouse. We got to design it. I mean, I thought that was great. I was a firefighter there. And one thing I always did in logistics, I always brought in the end user. We weren't going to make any decisions about apparatus, firehouses, equipment without bringing in the people that are going to use it. So every project had firefighters, fire officers attached to it so we could get their input. So we designed Engine 57. We purchased burn-through protected 1 3/4 hose line, 1,400 lengths. This hose line came out of the tragedy of the Back Bay fire in Boston, where they lost Mike Kennedy and Ed Walsh. I got to meet Steve Schaefer, the chief from up there, through FSRI. So we were able to purchase that hose line for all of our engine companies. We put on a tower ladder class that we built. We purchased 5 75-foot Seagrave aerial scopes. So we brought in Chief Chris Iser from New York and Chief Tony Kelleher from Washington, D.C. They're both very experienced in tower ladders. They helped us build the class that we delivered. And again, you get to see the proof in the end result. Just a couple nights ago, I was at a 2-alarm church fire in West Philadelphia, and Tower Ladder 13 just did a phenomenal job getting into position. They pretty much wedged themselves in a lot between 2 row homes. It was impressive to see, to get that bucket into a place to make an impact at this church fire. And they went through the training. They got a great captain there, Justin Duff, who trains them every day. And it paid off that night without a doubt. So, that was great. And then we transitioned all of our legacy AFFF foam over to green foam, which leads me to a funny story about something known as the Delco Mafia. So there's a story, and how stories in the firehouse go, how they can grow and morph into just crazy stuff. So there was a story going around that Tony brings all his Delco boys on these special projects, and what I do is I just form these groups with people who love the job, who want to give back. And, sometimes it ends up being the same people on every project because they're always the ones that step up. So that was it's Tony's Delco Mafia, and he's the Godfather, and, all this. So it was all funny. It was all, in good fun. Somebody made a video of The Sopranos, basically like a spoof where Tony Soprano and it's like a voiceover of them at a meeting, and it's like, if you ever need anything, if you get a bad transfer or a bad assignment, you go to this man. And it's hilarious. The amount of time and effort that went into this is funny. But the even funnier part of this whole Delco Mafia thing, which the people that they claim are in it, they're from Jersey, guys that moved over here from Jersey, guys from other counties, guys from Philly, so just all in good firehouse fun. But I get called downtown to fire headquarters by the commissioner, Adam Teal at the time, I'm the logistics chief, and he wants us to take on this major project of transitioning to this green foam. It was a lot of work to clean out the apparatus that had the old legacy foam in it. There was a lot going into it. So after the meeting, he goes, "Listen, I know I put you on a tough time frame, but I'm sure the Delco Mafia can get it done." So this made it all the way to the commissioner, which was it was funny. That's what the firehouse is all about. It's all about having a good time while getting the job done. You got to have fun.
Of course.
Like this, you got to be able to laugh. And the Delco Mafia. I was coming on here. Yeah, I was coming on
that's
here.
That's you're going to see if you get a bad transfer.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But the video, the work that went into it, it was a work of art, to say the least. But my last thing with logistics is I want to make mention of June of 2022. We lost Lieutenant Sean Williamson in a building collapse, also in North Philadelphia, 3rd and Indiana. It was a terrible night. In logistics, my battalion chief, who in the organizational chart works right under me, was Bob Brennan. Bob was a lieutenant at Engine 57 when I got out of fire school. He was on a different platoon, but he always looked out for me, took care of me. I got there around Christmas time. They were trying to set me up with a prank. They're like, "Oh, you got Ralph Dietrich in the Pollyanna. We had a Pollyanna before you got assigned, and you got to get Ralph Dietrich a present." Well, Ralph is like the Vietnam War vet, grizzled Saudi firefighter, and they're trying to get me, the new guy, to get him a Christmas present. And Bobby Brennan grabs me one night. He's like, "Hey, kid, listen, don't do that. Don't get him a Christmas present. There's no Pollyanna." So he took care of me. Now he's my battalion chief. So the night of the fire, I get a call. It's like 3 a.m. Listen, there was a collapse. Sean is buried. Sean was, in a cruel twist of irony, he was the first in ladder officer for the Matt Letourneau fire on Colorado Street. He was in ladder 14 that day. And he was big into training. He was a Rescue 1 firefighter, really squared away. They said Sean's trapped in his collapse. There's other members trapped, and Bob Brennan's kid is one of them, Bobby Jr., who I taught in fire school. So I get up, I fly to 3rd and Indiana, and I wanted to confirm that Bob Jr. was in the collapse before I went and woke up his father. I needed to see it, hear it before I turn this man's world upside down. I get there, it's confirmed, he's trapped. He's alive, but he's trapped. So I'm going to drive to my Bob Brennan, the battalion chief's house, to wake him up and drive him to the scene. Well, as I'm walking back to my car, he comes walking up. Somebody had already called him. So I'm like, "Bob, what are you doing here? I'm on my way to get you." And he said, is Bob trapped? I said, "Yeah, Bob's trapped." I said, "He's alive, but he's buried." So we just had a moment, and I said, "Look, I'm going to stand next to you the whole time throughout this operation, and we'll get through it together." The members of Special Operations, as they typically do, went above and beyond and did an absolutely phenomenal job. Heavy rescue to squad companies. They were able to extricate multiple members that were trapped, including Bob Jr. Unfortunately, Sean did pass away, but we got Bob and the other members over to Temple. And after a very long road to recovery, after being trapped in something like that, he came back light duty. I was able to get him into TSU so he could drive his dad day to day as his aide. And if he's not back full duty yet to Ladder 18, his company that he said, "I'm getting back to no matter what," he will be there shortly. So there was a happy ending, if there was any such thing, to a terrible night. But that was my time in logistics in a nutshell. And I definitely want to share that story.
And a lot of great stories tonight. That, again, this is why I have the outline, but if somebody mentions things that aren't necessarily pertaining to the outline, I'm glad they do, because there's so many subplots within this conversation tonight that have given me a great education. And again, it's a great way to keep the memory of these guys alive, and I'm glad that you're mentioning them. So whoever you want to mention, and you've mentioned a lot of guys so far, I'm not opposed to it. I thank you for doing it. It's a great education for all of us, and not only the department, but what these guys did, and of course the ultimate sacrifice they made. And in line with that, unfortunately, and again, you're going to see this a lot in a bigger city, in the fire service, and certainly in the police service as well. With these tragedies, and we'll keep it to fire mainly, of course, comes more education, more of an idea of what can go wrong, and more of an impetus to want to prevent these things from happening again. Structural collapse is something that's very prevalent in the fire service. Of course, everybody thinks when it comes to structural collapse of the extreme of what we saw in New York City 24 years ago, but even just day to day, two-story home can come down. When a fire load, depending on the fire load of the building, I should say, that can contribute to collapse as well. Being one of the incident safety officers, along with my cousin, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you have all this in your mind. And when you're going to these boxes, you may not be command, but you're one of the guys that has to keep account of everybody. We talked about earlier, Philadelphia is very much not a hit it hard from the yard department. But nevertheless, it's not an easy job for you. It's a good job. But your current assignment is not an easy one, because what's the natural inclination of firefighters? To want to go in, to want to be aggressive. You certainly, as we've talked about tonight, are and were in the companies that you were assigned to a very aggressive firefighter and a very aggressive and equally aggressive officer. But there has to be that time to know, like you talked about with that job a month after Matt Letourneau's line of duty death, when to stop, when to say, hey, something's not right, when to let the incident commander know, hey, you might want to look out for this. So tell me about the current safety battalion, what your role is, I should say, at a structure fire, and some of the changes you've been able to implement. If I could speak English, that'd be great, in this current role.
I mean, Mike, you nailed it with what you said. It's a fine line. I remember as a firefighter having to be pulled back by my officer. Get it? What are you trying to go in there and do? But as a chief, it's even, more stressful being outside, and you're putting these people, our firefighters, in these buildings. You're making decisions, and it's definitely a fine line. One thing that's occurring in Philly and the other older cities, and I'll use Baltimore, for example, is a lot of these houses are, they're built in the late 1800s. They're at the end of their lifespan, where the fire service, we get, and we get focused on type 5, lightweight construction, truss. It's all very important, but we can't lose sight of the fact that these old legacy type 3 brick and joist properties, they're in terrible shape without fire, and then you had fire and you had our members operating. So you got to keep that in mind. An area like North Philly, where I run out of as a safety chief now, I cover the whole city. It's a great spot. I took it coming out of staff as a deputy chief. It's like a citywide ticket to buff fires. I can go to any fire I want citywide, get dispatched on an all hands assignment and greater. But a couple weeks ago, I had a fire in North Philadelphia where you're hyper focused on building construction, building collapse, safety. That's my job. The chief, the incident commanders doing their thing out front. I didn't like the way the building looked. I had a conversation with the chief. It was an older row home that was only attached on one side. The other side had already been knocked down. It was probably a fire at some point. So the building's already substantially weaker, not supported on both sides. So we said, hey, you know what? It's already been searched. They're not making any progress on the fire floor. Let's back them out and approach this from another angle. Now, the place never collapsed, but you know what? The members were safe. We gave them a chance. They got in there. They operated. They searched. They did a great job getting water on the fire. It was deep seated. There was heavy contents in the dwelling. It delayed the initial attack line. So we just backed down, regrouped, and went about it a different way. And that happens.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's that extra set of eyes. There's so many moving parts at a structure fire. Naturally, certain details, and it's not because of neglect, it's not because of recklessness, but you're moving, and sometimes you can get that tunnel vision. You may miss a detail, but having that extra set of eyes, having that safety officer there, hey, this stairwell's compromised. Hey, that roofing doesn't look so stable. Maybe we want to get guys off the roof. It helps because, again, as we talked about earlier, we can't stress it enough. Everybody's got to go home. And sometimes, again, not that you let it burn, you want to fight the fire. You certainly want to be aggressive in putting it out and conserve property. That's the second most important thing besides conserving life in the fire service, but not at the cost of lives of members. Then these incidents kind of segue perfectly into writing your book, which we have the image of here, which is The Fire Environment, Timeless Lessons. And I feel like that's a very appropriate title because it doesn't matter what advances, and there's been so many in the fire service over the years, these lessons, think about fires from the 60s. You mentioned Chief Dunn earlier. Chief Dunn's main fire that he talks about, his main aspect of firefighting, A structural collapse. What is that born out of? The 23rd Street collapse of 1966, an incident that turns 60 years old next year, and yet the lessons from that are still being analyzed today. So very much in line with that comes this book. So as someone who has written a book, I can sympathize with the process. It's not an easy one. There's so much you want to put in. There's some stuff you have to take out. Narrowing it down is not easy. Tell me first about the decision to write this book, subsequently the process in putting it together, and the feedback you've gotten since you released it.
So the book, I started keeping a journal back when I was at 57s. Rich Leposki, my senior guy, he told me one night at the watch desk, one thing I regret, because he was 30 some years in the very busy times of West Philly, is I didn't write anything down. He said, so write down jobs you make, lessons you learned, mistakes you made, because we all make mistakes. You got to learn from them. So that's what I did, and I never stopped. I kept this book. From then, I went back and remembered jobs in Upper Darby, things I did right, things I did wrong. And every job I had in Philly, firefighter through the ranks, what did I mess up? What could I have done better? Every time I would critique myself. And I had this book, and I didn't know what to do with it. And then comes FSRI, and they, like I said, I think they changed the culture for the good in Philadelphia. And they put out a ton of information. And what I found was the information they were putting out was tying into a lot of the lessons that I had in my book from our senior firefighters. They weren't wrong. The terminology was different, but they were telling me about don't get caught in a chimney. Well, that was the flow path. And this went on. And I'm looking at the book, and I'm looking, or at my journal, and I'm looking at the lessons from FSRI, and I'm like, a lot of them tie in together. So I kind of just put it aside, and, life gets busy, home gets busy. I got a very busy home life. I would like to mention my amazing wife, Mary, and our 4 kids, our 4 girls. We're in a wonderfully blended family. It's Michaela, Sarah, Morgan, Madison, great girls. I'm a girl dad, and I love it.
I was about to say, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, they keep me busy. But Mary, she's my rock, and, it's a good time to bring her up because she took care of the family while I kind of went into this crazy mode of writing this book. So what happened, which I'm sure you can agree with, once you get in the zone, it's hard to get out of it.
Yeah.
Many nights, not coming to bed till 3, 4 in the morning, typing all night. But what happened was after the fire dynamics training, we didn't do, and I say I'll take the hit for it. I didn't do a good job of making sure that the continuing education kept up. So like anything else, as the years went on, some old habits started to show back through. It's natural. And we had a couple near misses, a couple close calls. And when I looked at them, I was like, man, we talked about something similar to that in dynamics. So what happened was we went to a chief staff meeting. And in the chief staff meeting, we were throwing ideas around about training, and we should incorporate this, and we should do command and control and fire dynamics. And it was almost like I just had a light bulb go off. I'm like, we did this, and I have all this information. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room, but I wrote a lot of stuff down throughout my career, and I kept all the information from the fire dynamics class. And I was like, I got to step up and do my part and own this and put this together in some sort of manual. So, I'm sure you can agree with it. I kind of got into the zone and started typing and comparing my lessons learned from all my mistakes in my journal to the FSRI material. And my initial goal was to just release a manual for Philadelphia. I was going to give it to the Fire Academy to give out. I was going to give it out in my travels. I like to get out, have a cup of coffee at the kitchen table, every tour with the members. It's one of the reasons I like the citywide safety division, because I can pick and choose the firehouses wherever. And that was it. And then I started to show it to some people outside the Philadelphia Fire Department, some great people from Wilmington, from Camden, Gabe Angemi, Ryan Kincaid. These are great guys. Mike Nasty from Prince George County.
Yep,
people that, I respect their opinion, and I wanted to get the point of view from other fire departments because our mission's the same, but the way we do business might differ by departments due to staffing, housing stock, whatever the case may be. So I wanted them to read it and get eyes on it, along with some people, some of my confidants, my sounding board in Philadelphia, people I trust, like everybody I mentioned earlier. And you got Corey Hulling, Sean Fraser, Sean McCauley, so many other guys that helped with this project. And I had them read it, and they're like, "Yeah, you got a book here. You got a book. Do something with it." So I took a chance, and I reached out to a couple publishers, and here we are. It's out. The feedback's been good, and that's all I wanted to do was just share information. My whole career, all I've wanted to do is share what's been shared with me and pass it on. And that was the whole point of the book, was to just share information.
And there it is on your website, which I'll link in the description of this episode. You can buy it on Amazon, as you can see, for those of you watching on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. And you could also buy it on Barnes & Noble. Again, the book is The Fire Environment, Timeless Lessons. And that is by Deputy Chief Tony Bompadre, our guest here tonight. Well, Chief, we've been talking for 2 hours, and we've covered just about everything. It did go fast, but time flies when you're having fun. And that now brings us into the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. I think the first question, the rapid fire, I'm going to change it a bit. It's almost like the original question was favorite neighborhood in Philadelphia to work, but that's like asking you to pick your favorite kid. And I'm not going to put you through that because that's not fair to all the great places that you worked. But I will say this, I'll switch it up a bit. If time machines were real, and you watch the show, so you've heard me ask this question before, and you could go back in time to a certain spot in your career, what's the spot that if you can go back tomorrow, not that you don't love where you are now, I'm sure you do, where are you going back?
Ooh, so that's tough too. Like I said, I've loved all my assignments, love the one you're with. Everywhere I went was a gift. Was very lucky. I would probably, if you're putting me on the spot here, I would say I would go back to 57s and maybe walk down that path of doing some time in a ladder company. Just for myself. I'm not saying it would have had a different impact on the way I carried myself throughout my career, but put some assigned ladder company work as a firefighter.
No wrong answer there. I won't ask you the second question either, because you've covered a lot of great fires tonight as far as the most memorable one. A lot of them that you discussed with me have stood out. So, unless you want to interject anything, you're more than welcome to.
I just wanted to mention the civil unrest of 2020. Yes. I just wanted to walk down the road of my experience that night. So randomly, I was in staff at the training academy. Randomly, I picked a comp shift to pick up in the field. I told you I like to work in the field. Well, I picked that night at the end of May to work in Battalion 7, and I ended up for the 24-hour tour in the heart of it in West Philly on 52nd Street. We went to 11 jobs that night. It was a career night. I learned so much. I never thought I'd give a report of heavy fire shown from a store and we have to leave the area. It was a crazy time. We talked about so many wonderful people in these neighborhoods. I saw a lot of good that day too in these neighborhoods. People banding together in West Philly, the citizens. I'm very proud to say I work in West Philly and serve that community. But a couple of things stick out. So Devin Riccio, who's a friend of mine, he shows up. At the time, he had a role that involved being a liaison with the police, and thankfully he did, because we were on a job on 52nd Street in the storefront, and the scene was secured, but then it wasn't. In the middle of us fighting this store fire with 2 engines, 2 ladders in service, we were slowly getting overtaken by the crowd, and some tear gas was fired into the crowd, and we were unintended targets of that tear gas. So that was quite the scene, bailing into a fire building, telling everyone, get in the fire building. Luckily, the fire was knocked down. One individual that night I wanted to bring up, Mark Zielinski. So Mark was one of my cadets in the 189. He's at ladder 8 when I'm at 19 to cross the floor, and I'm watching him grow from cadet to firefighter. Well, now he's a lieutenant, and he's working engine 41 that night. He's a new lieutenant, and I watched him grow into the lieutenant role that night. So early in the night, we had a fire in a drugstore, fully involved. So I gave the order defensive attack, like we talked about earlier, that fine line between aggressiveness and this just isn't our night.
Yep.
And as I'm walking around, I see Mark doing what any, aggressive firefighter will do. He's trying to get his company in the position to maybe eventually get their way inside. And, we had some words outside, Mark, what are you doing? You're in charge. So as the night went on, I think his company went to 7 or 8 jobs. I'm listening to his first in reports. And by the time the next morning, his first in report was so calm, collected. It was like a walk in the park from, we got heavy fire from a storefront with apartments above. Like, he grew into the role that night. He's doing a great job. He's in special operations now at Squad 47 as a lieutenant. So I definitely want to bring him up. And just overall, the way everybody operated that night, above and beyond fire, EMS, police. It was a crazy night at the time, but looking back on it, to be a small part of it. I remember the last job Rich Leposki always talked about, his favorite jobs in West Philly were the ones where the sun would be coming up, be their second or third fire of the tour back in the 80s and 90s. And it's a West Philly sunrise. And, that morning, I remember looking up at this one job, and I see Doug Dowling up on the roof. He was a firefighter I worked with in West Philly. Great guy. And he looks down and he's like, "Hey, Tony, crazy night, huh?" And the sun's coming up over his head. And I thought of Rich and that West Philly sunrise, and we got out unscathed. We had no injuries to any of our members. And I remember driving home that morning and reflecting and, getting a lump in my throat. Like, I can't believe we got out of that without any injuries and, fairly unscathed. So everybody rose to the occasion that night. My aide, Ed McGoldrick, did a phenomenal job in the car with me. And when you said about a memorable, night, I'm like, oh, it's a career night for sure. One, I hope we never repeat.
Yes.
For sure. But I just wanted to mention, the members that, everybody stepped up that night for the community, and it wasn't just West Philly, it was, the city. So.
Yeah, that was a very chaotic time. I'm actually glad I asked that question now and didn't skip over it, because that was a story. We didn't even talk about that earlier when we were talking about you being assigned down to the training unit at this time. That whole let's just forget 2020 ever happened.
Yeah.
Between that and obviously the pandemic, we talk about it not being our night. It wasn't our year, but thankfully we're starting to get more distance from that time. Hard to believe it's been 5 years since that time, but we'll leave that. That was a good memory that deserved to be highlighted. But everything else that happened that year, we'll leave in the rearview mirror.
Good with that.
Yeah. Third question, rapid fire. You've been in leadership for a very long time. 14 of your 20 years have been spent in an officer's role in different variations. What's one principle of leadership that you feel has guided you through the ranks?
So promote up to take care of more people, and don't major in the minors. Don't worry about don't sweat the small stuff. This job is too serious, so don't take yourself too serious as an officer. The bars can get heavy. You got to make the tough decisions. But I tell guys, like, I had a bunch of lucky Saturdays taking these promotional exams. It doesn't make me the smartest in the room. Doesn't make me the best in the room. We work together. I lean on the firefighters, the senior firefighters that run the houses. And like I said, every position I went into, I never took myself that serious. Like when I was down fire headquarters, I was on a first name basis with the cleaning crew in fire headquarters, every morning having coffee, and they'd be in vacuuming my office. Like, they keep fire headquarters operating, somebody's got to clean it. We don't have firefighters down there to do housework. So why wouldn't I take a couple minutes and get to know the cleaning crew? Funny story. I was a new lieutenant and I got promoted young. And I'm working in the Northeast. It's an overtime shift. It had to be a holiday because there was no reason for me to ever work that far from my battalion, other than a holiday. Yeah. So it was a cold morning. So I have on like a quarter zip with the 43's ladder 9 patch. There's no rank insignia on that. So nobody knows I'm a lieutenant. I don't know anyone there. So I knock on the door at 6 a.m. The only person there right at that time is the firefighter at the watch desk. He lets me in, and I'm carrying my gear in. And before I can get a word out, he's like, "Can you do me a big favor? I got to get out of here. Can you jump on the back step? I'm in the engine. I got something going on at home." He doesn't know I'm the officer, and it happened so quick. And he seemed like to be in such a panic to get out. I was like, "Yeah, I got it. Go ahead." So now I'm on the back step. I'm supposed to be the lieutenant. And the lieutenant who I'm relieving comes out at like 6:30 in the morning. And now I'm sitting watch too. I'm sitting at the watch desk. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to relieve you once somebody comes in to relieve me on the backup position in the engine. And he's like, what is going on? Like, don't take yourself so serious. Like, I'm going to tap my car. Like, I'm the lieutenant. And it's like, no, go ahead. Get out of here. I just been promoted a couple weeks. And that's it. Like I said, it's an extreme story, but it was funny nonetheless, looking back on it. This was probably 2011 when that happened. And there's so much, we can sit here and talk about. There's so much tragedy, but there's so many good times, and the good times outweigh the bad. And yeah, I still smile. I love my days off. I love being home with my family, and I also love getting back into the firehouse for my tours. Mm-hmm. After 20 years, I do still enjoy the firehouse. I love Engine 50. I love their aggressiveness. 50's ladder 12, medic 22. My office is on the second floor. Above the apparatus floor, and I love when I hear them go out for box runs. I timed it the one day. I hear them sliding the pole, and I hear the 4 doors close on the cab. Bang, 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 and they're out the door. 17 seconds for a first. So I'm like, this is beautiful. They're just they don't mess around. They don't mess around. It's a great house, and they take care of me. And if I can take care of them, as an officer, getting back to the question, take care of your people. Absolutely.
Man, that's talking about a fast turnout time. That's incredible.
Yeah, I just, out they go, into the bunker gear and out the door.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, again, all those 60-second drills back in the academy has served those guys well. They are well under those 60 seconds. Thanks for going into that as well. You had a lot of mentors. I was going to ask you one of the questions of the rapid fire, second to last one, being mentors who've made a lasting impact. You've talked about so many of them tonight. If you can combine all of their advice into one, what's the main impact each one has made on you that has you where you are right now?
So I think it was the way they carried themselves, and it was in their delivery. Like, they were no nonsense on the fire floor and on the fire ground. And they were just people in the firehouse, good people that were willing to share information. You could have a conversation with them about, your life, they were approachable. They didn't let the rank go to their head. But when the bells went off, it was all business, and you knew they were in charge. And they were going to take care of you, and they were going to show you the way, and they were going to teach you. They always took time to show me the way. And anything I know today, I learned. I was very fortunate in the companies I worked in, but people placed me in them companies. They took a chance with me, and they put me in these busy companies, and then they taught me. And that's, going back to the book, I just want to teach people, pass on what I was taught.
That you're certainly doing. And that brings us to the last question. It segues perfectly into this final question, the rapid fire, which is, you've been on the job now 20 years. Again, we talk about it much like our conversation tonight. Time flies when you're having fun. What does it mean, if you had to define it in a sentence or two, what does it mean to serve as a firefighter in the city of brotherly love?
It's an honor. It's an absolute honor to be in this fire department. And I tell people, people call us on their worst day. They're down on their luck, and they're in these neighborhoods that are very tough neighborhoods, and they look at firefighters. They're there to help. They say, please help me, firefighter. That is a major responsibility that cannot be taken lightly. One thing that was a non-negotiable with me, and anybody that worked with me knows this, is that the public was treated with respect 100% of the time. I don't care if it was our 20th run on a 100-degree night and somebody called because their nose was bleeding at 3 a.m. They get the same treatment as everybody else, because those neighborhoods, you want to go to these neighborhoods for the fire duty. Well, you're going to earn that fire duty through a lot of running and through a lot of taking care of people. So you're going to take care of them. And you're not going to treat them with anything less than 100% dignity and respect on my watch. And people knew that working with me. Don't let me, I only had a couple non-negotiables, and don't let me catch you, giving anybody an attitude is the best way I can put it. Because it's an honor. It's an honor to work for this fire department, to work in these neighborhoods, to work in this city.
Well said, Chief. Perfect way to put a bow on this show. Again, the Chief's book, which you can get on Amazon as well as Barnes & Nobles, which I will link in the description as mentioned earlier, is The Fire Environment, Timeless Lessons, which is well worth the read. I certainly want to get my hands on it and begin the process of reading it pretty soon. Thanks again. Stick around. We'll talk off air. You mentioned so many people earlier, but again, I'll give the floor right back to you. Before I say goodbye to the audience, if there's any other shout outs you want to give, Chief, go right ahead.
No, I know we mentioned a lot of people, and like I said, my wife Mary, our beautiful kids, our beautiful daughters, they take care of me just like everybody in the firehouse does, and and I'm just happy to meet you, Mike. I'm glad we were able to hook up and get to know each other. So it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Like I said, one of these days I'll come down to Philly and hopefully catch up with you and my cousin as well. And who knows, maybe even ride out with you guys and see what it's like down there.
You got it, Mike.
All right. So we'll make that happen sometime down the road. Again, make sure you get your hands on the Chief's books. It's The Fire Environment, Timeless Lessons. Coming up next in the Mike New Haven podcast, we'll see if we have a show Monday. Dave Russell should be the guest. He was a lieutenant in the FDNY and has a lot of roots here in Connecticut, was also involved in the Air Force, I believe, in their firefighting unit. So that could be another volume of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, awaiting confirmation on that. Next Friday, this is confirmed, should be volume 7 of the Best of the Bravest nationwide with former Bridgeport, Connecticut firefighter, who's currently the chief of department in Danbury, Connecticut, Rich Thode. And Bridgeport, one of the busier jobs in the Northeast as well in its own right. So Rich has a lot of stories from fighting fires in that particular city, and he'll be here to tell them next Friday at 6. Again, we hope to see you Monday as well. I'm just waiting confirmation on that one. In the meantime, on behalf of Chief Tony Bompadre and all of you tuning in, I very much appreciate you guys tuning on this Friday. Actually, before I forget the outro song, for those of you listening on the audio side, it was released in 1994, one of my favorite songs, regarded as one of his better songs as well over the course of his lengthy career. Naturally, with the Philadelphia guest, Bruce Springsteen, with Streets of Philadelphia to play us out on the audio side. In the meantime, on behalf of Deputy Chief Tony Bompadre and all of you in the audience, I'm Mike Colón. This has been Volume 6 of the Best of the Bravest nationwide, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Be safe.
Hey, Mike.